A 10-year-old boy locked inside a motel bathroom sent a desperate text message to the only person he thought could save him. But the message never reached his grandfather. It reached a man the world had already given up on, a scarred biker president who hadn't spoken his dead daughter's name in 7 years. Outside that bathroom door, a monster was tearing through plywood and drywall to get to the child. And on a rain-soaked highway, 7 motorcycles were cutting through the storm like something ancient and unforgiving riding toward judgment. What happened next inside room 104 will stay with you long after this story ends. Stay until the very last word. I promise you, it's worth it. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and let's ride. The rain didn't fall that night. It attacked. It came sideways off the mountains like something personal, hammering the corrugated roof of the Trails End Motel with a violence that made the walls shake. Route 9 stretched empty in both directions, a dead black ribbon cutting through rural Virginia where the nearest town was 40 minutes south, and the nearest hospital was an hour past that. The motel sat alone at the edge of nothing, 12 rooms built from cinder block and regret, half of them dark, the other half occupied by the kind of people who paid cash and never looked anyone in the eye. Room 104 was the last unit on the left. Its window faced the woods. Inside that room, the world was ending quietly. Leo Mercer sat in the bathtub with his knees pulled to his chest and the shower curtain wrapped around his shoulders like armor made of plastic and desperation. He was 10 years old, 62 pounds, and his lungs were closing. The asthma had been building for 20 minutes, slow at first, like breathing through a coffee straw, then tighter, sharper, until every inhale sounded like paper tearing inside his ribs. His inhaler was on the nightstand in the main room, 12 feet away. It might as well have been on the moon, because Wade Crusher Beckett was between Leo and that inhaler. And Crusher was not done yet. The sounds coming from the other side of the bathroom door were the sounds Leo had memorized like a language he never wanted to learn. The wet crack of a fist against drywall, the dull thud of furniture being shoved, glass breaking in short, ugly bursts, and underneath all of it, the low rumble of Crusher's voice. Not yelling anymore, just talking, which was worse. Crusher yelled when he was drunk. He talked when he was dangerous. Leo's mother, Shelley, had stopped making noise 7 minutes ago. He didn't know what that meant. He couldn't let himself think about what that meant. The prepaid phone in his hands was a piece of junk, cracked screen, taped battery cover, 3% charge. His grandfather's number was the only one saved in it. Pop, the man who smelled like pipe tobacco and engine grease and always called Leo Captain. The man who'd begged Shelley to leave Crusher a dozen times. The man whose number Leo had memorized by repeating it every night before sleep, like a prayer to no one in particular. He typed the digits with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. The asthma was making his vision swim. Rain screamed against the tiny bathroom window, and in his panic, in the dark, in the cold, with his lungs folding shut, Leo's trembling thumb hit a 6 instead of an 8. One wrong number. The message launched into the void. Please come now, room 104 Trails End, Motel Route 9. He's hurting us, please. It didn't reach Harold Mercer in his small house 40 miles south. It reached a phone sitting on a scarred oak bar inside a building that smelled like motor oil, stale beer, and history. The text glowed blue in the darkness of the Iron Saints clubhouse at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in November. Ronan Grave Maddox picked up the phone because he couldn't sleep. He hadn't slept properly in 7 years. Not since the night his daughter died in a house fire he arrived 4 minutes too late to prevent. 4 minutes. The math of it had carved trenches through his mind that no amount of whiskey or highway miles could fill. He was 51 years old, 6'3", 240 pounds of scar tissue, faded military tattoos, and the kind of stillness that made people cross the street. He'd served 2 tours in a desert that still showed up in his dreams. He'd buried a wife to cancer and a daughter to flame. He'd built the Iron Saints from 7 broken men who had nowhere else to go, and he'd led them for 12 years with a simple code: you protect what can't protect itself, or you don't wear the patch. Tonight he sat alone in the main room of the clubhouse while Johnny Cash murmured low from the jukebox and rain hammered the tin roof overhead. The other members were either asleep in the back rooms or out on late runs. Grave had a glass of bourbon he hadn't touched and a cigarette burning down to nothing between his scarred fingers. Then the phone buzzed. He read the message twice. His jaw tightened the second time. Please come now. Room 104, Trails End Motel, Route 9. He's hurting us, please. Wrong number. Obviously. Some stranger's desperate signal fired into the wrong sky. Any reasonable person would have deleted it, maybe called the police, maybe done nothing at all. The world was full of violence that wasn't your business. That was the unspoken agreement of civilization. Someone else's nightmare stays someone else's. But Grave Maddox had stopped being civilized a long time ago. He stared at the screen. The blue light carved shadows across the burn scar running from his left ear to his jawline. He read the words again. He's hurting us. Present tense. Happening now. And the grammar. The missing apostrophe, the lowercase, the raw, desperate simplicity of it. That wasn't an adult's text. That was a child. His thumb hovered over the keyboard for 3 seconds. Then he typed back. Who is this? The reply came 14 seconds later, misspelled and frantic. Leo, I'm 10. Please, my mom isn't moving. He broke the door. Grave stood up so fast the bar stool fell backward and cracked against the concrete floor. The sound woke Deacon. Marcus Deacon Cross had been sleeping on the leather couch near the pool table with his boots still on and a dog-eared paperback open across his chest. He was the club's vice president, a former Army medic with hands steady enough to stitch a wound by flashlight and eyes that had seen enough field trauma to last 3 lifetimes. He was up and alert before the bar stool finished clattering. What? He said. Not a question, a readiness. Grave held up the phone. Deacon read it. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes went cold and operational, the way it used to when incoming fire started and thinking became a luxury no one could afford. Trails End, Deacon said. That's the shithole off Route 9, 40 minutes. 25 if we ride like we mean it. Deacon was already pulling on his jacket. How many? Don't know. Kid says 1 male, mother down. He sounds like he's losing air, asthma or panic, maybe both. We calling it in. Grave paused at the door. Rain was visible through the window, falling in silver sheets under the parking lot's single light. He thought about the police. He thought about response times in rural Virginia. 45 minutes on a good night, longer in a storm. He thought about a 10-year-old boy counting seconds in a bathtub while some piece of garbage kicked through a door to get to him. We ride first, Grave said. Call it in from the road. Within 4 minutes, 7 men were awake, dressed, and walking through the rain toward their motorcycles. Nobody asked for details. Nobody needed them. The text had been passed around in silence, and silence was all the answer required. Felix Torch Varela Salosh Varela, the club's road captain, a compact Puerto Rican with a prosthetic left hand he'd earned in Fallujah, kicked his Harley to life first. Behind him, the others fell into formation with the automatic precision of men who'd ridden together through worse than weather. Bone, Hatchet, Pike, Wren, Deacon. And at the front, Grave, stone-faced, rain already soaking through his leather cut, his phone pressed against his ear beneath his helmet. Leo, you still there? The voice that came back was thin and wet and broken in places that had nothing to do with the phone connection. He's kicking the door again. I can hear the wood cracking. Listen to me. What's your name? Your full name? Leo James Mercer. Okay, Leo James Mercer. My name is Grave, and I'm coming to get you. Do you hear me? I am coming to get you. I can't breathe right. Grave's grip tightened on the handlebar until his knuckles went white beneath the gloves. Somewhere deep in the scar tissue of his memory, another child's voice called out from inside a burning house, a voice he'd been 4 minutes too late to reach. The rain hit his face like needles. The engine screamed beneath him. You don't have to breathe right, he said. You just have to breathe. Small ones. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I'll do it with you. Ready? He heard the boy try, heard the wheeze, the struggle, the thin whistle of air fighting through swollen passages. Good. That's good, Leo. Keep going. I'm on the road right now, and I'm coming fast. 7 Harleys tore through the storm at 90 miles an hour. Their headlights cut through the rain like searchlights sweeping a battlefield. The road was empty and black, and the mountains on either side were invisible walls of darkness pressing in. Graves stayed on the line with Leo, talking him through each breath, counting with him, keeping him alive with nothing but a voice traveling through bad cell service and worse weather. Behind him, the Saints rode in tight formation. No one spoke over the engines. No one needed to. They were veterans, mechanics, convicted felons, men the system had spit out and the world had forgotten. But they were riding through a hurricane at midnight to reach a child they'd never met, and not one of them considered turning back. Because that was the code. Not written, not spoken, just understood. The way gravity is understood. Not because someone explains it, but because you feel it pulling. Inside room 104, things were getting worse. Crusher had put his fist through the upper panel of the bathroom door. His arm hung through the hole like something mechanical and wrong, fingers grasping at empty air while he cursed and pulled back for another strike. The door was cheap hollow core, designed for privacy, not survival. It had maybe 2 more hits left in it before it came apart entirely. Leo pressed himself deeper into the bathtub. The shower curtain rustled against his shaking body. He could see Crusher's knuckles through the hole in the door, bloody and enormous, and beyond them, through the gap, a narrow slice of the main room where his mother lay on the carpet between the bed and the wall. He could see her hair. He could see one arm stretched outward, palm up, fingers slightly curled. He could not see her face. "He's almost through," Leo whispered into the phone. Grave heard it. Every man on every motorcycle heard it through the intercom system wired into their helmets. "How far?" Deacon's voice crackled through the comm. 8 minutes, Torch answered from the GPS mounted on his tank. 8 minutes. Grave did the math the same way he'd done it 7 years ago outside a burning house on Maple Street. The math of distance versus destruction, speed versus suffering, the cruel arithmetic of whether love can outrun catastrophe. "Leo, I need you to do something for me. Can you lock the window?" It doesn't lock. The latch is broken." "Good. That means it opens. Can you open it?" I can't leave my mom. You're not leaving her. You're getting air. Open the window and breathe. Stay low. Stay quiet. I'm 6 minutes away." He heard the boy move, heard the window scrape open, old aluminum grinding against a swollen frame, heard the rain get louder as cold November air rushed into the tiny bathroom, heard Leo gasp, not from fear this time, but from oxygen hitting lungs that had been starving. "That's it," Graves said. "Keep breathing." But Crusher heard the window too. "You think you're climbing out?" Crusher's voice was gravel and venom, the voice of a man who'd grown comfortable with cruelty the way other men grew comfortable with furniture. "Where you gonna go, Leo, huh? Into the woods? In the dark? There's nothing out there, boy. There's nothing anywhere for you." Leo didn't answer. He pressed the phone against his chest so Crusher wouldn't hear the voice on the other end. Rain blew through the open window and hit his face, and for 1 second, one brief, terrible second, he considered climbing through. The window was small, but so was he. The woods were dark, but the room was darker, and his mother wasn't moving. "Leo!" Graves' voice muffled against the boy's chest. "Don't run. Stay where you are. I'm coming." Crusher hit the door again. This time the lower hinge gave way. The door sagged inward at a drunken angle, and through the widening gap, Leo could see all of Crusher now. 6'1", 220, shaved head gleaming with sweat, a half-empty bottle of wild turkey dangling from his left hand like a weapon he hadn't decided to use yet. His eyes were the worst part. Not angry, not wild, just empty. The eyes of a man who had stopped seeing other people as people a long time ago. "Come here, boy." Leo's chest locked. The asthma surged, a full bronchospasm that turned his breath into a high, thin whistle. He couldn't speak, couldn't scream, could only press himself against the cold porcelain of the bathtub and watch the door fold inward like a dying thing. Then, distant at first, then growing, then undeniable, a sound cut through the rain. Engines. Not one, not two, a swarm. A rolling wall of thunder that grew louder with every heartbeat until it filled the entire night, vibrating through the motel walls, through the floor, through Leo's chest. Deep and rhythmic and unstoppable, like a war drum being played by giants. Crusher stopped mid-step. His head turned toward the window. The wild turkey bottle lowered an inch. For the first time since Leo had known him, 3 years of fists and silence and fear, something crossed Crusher's face that Leo had never seen before. Uncertainty. Headlights swept across the motel's exterior. Not the sharp, focused beams of police cruisers. Something wider, something lower, moving fast and arriving together with a unified precision that spoke of intention, not accident. The light poured through the thin curtains of room 104 and turned the entire room white for one long, blinding second. The engines didn't idle. They stopped, all at once, simultaneously, and the sudden silence was somehow louder than the thunder had been. Then came the boots. Heavy, deliberate. Crossing wet pavement with the measured cadence of men who were not in a hurry because they had already decided what was going to happen next. Leo counted them through the floor. 2, 4, 6, more, and each footfall landed with the weight of something permanent. Crusher moved to the window. He pulled the curtain back an inch and looked outside. What he saw drained the remaining color from his face. 7 men stood in the rain under the motel's flickering neon sign. They were soaked and still and enormous in their leather cuts, and every single one of them was looking directly at room 104. The one in front, the tallest, the one with the scar, was already walking toward the door. Crusher let the curtain fall. His breathing changed. The predator calculus behind his eyes was recalculating. New variables, new threats. The sudden and unwelcome math of being outnumbered by men who looked like they'd done worse things than he could imagine and slept fine afterward. He turned back toward the bathroom. "Leo, who'd you call?" Leo couldn't answer. His lungs were shut and his hands were shaking, and the phone pressed against his chest was silent now because Grave didn't need to talk anymore. Grave was here. The front door of room 104 didn't open. It came off its hinges in a single kick that sent it crashing inward against the wall. Rain and wind and cold night air flooded the room in a wave. Grave stood in the doorway with water running down his scarred face, and his eyes locked on Crusher with an expression that wasn't anger, wasn't fury, it was recognition. Grave had known men like Crusher in the military. Men who chose targets that couldn't fight back because the act of domination was the only architecture holding their hollow selves together. He'd watched men like this operate in war zones, saw not the enemy, not the soldiers, but the small, cruel predators who hid behind chaos and fed on the helpless. He knew what they were. He knew what they feared. They feared equals. Behind Grave, the saints filled the doorframe and spilled into the room. Deacon moved immediately to Shelley's crumpled form on the carpet, dropping to his knees with the focused urgency of a man whose hands remembered triage the way pianists remember scales. Torch positioned himself between Crusher and the bathroom door. Bone and Hatchet flanked the main exit. Pike stood at the window. Wren was already on the phone with 911, his voice low and precise, giving coordinates and conditions with the clinical detachment of someone who'd made this kind of call before. The room shrank. The air changed. Crusher stood in the center of it all like a cornered animal that had just realized the cage was already closed. "Who the hell are you?" Crusher said. His voice cracked on the last word. Grave didn't answer him. He stepped past Crusher without looking at him, the way you step past furniture, the way you step past nothing, and walked to the bathroom door. It hung from one hinge, splintered and broken. He pushed it aside carefully, gently. Leo was in the bathtub, wrapped in the shower curtain, wet, shaking. His lips were blue from oxygen deprivation, and his eyes were too wide, and his fingers were locked around the phone so tightly the plastic casing was cracking. Grave knelt. Not towering, not commanding, just kneeling on the cracked tile floor of a ruined bathroom in a motel that smelled like mildew and violence, bringing himself down to the level of a terrified child the way you lower yourself to approach a wounded animal, slow, deliberate, and without threat. He saw the inhaler on the floor of the main room. He looked at Torch. Torch understood, retrieved it, and placed it in Grave's open palm without a word. "Leo." The boy's eyes focused, barely. "I need you to breathe this in for me. Can you do that?" Leo's hand shook so badly that Grave had to guide the inhaler to his lips. The first puff was weak. The second was stronger. By the third, Leo's chest expanded with something resembling a full breath. and the blue tint began to fade from his lips. "You called me," Graves said quietly. "I came. That's how this works now." Behind them, Crusher made a mistake. He moved toward the bathroom. Maybe he thought he could still control the situation. Maybe the whiskey told him he was bigger than the math. Maybe he was just the kind of man who couldn't stop being what he was, even when the universe was giving him one final chance to try. He got 2 steps before Torch's prosthetic hand closed around his forearm like a vice forged in a foundry. Crusher looked down at the metal fingers gripping his flesh, and then up at the compact man attached to them. And what he saw in Torch's eyes made him understand something he should have understood the moment he heard the engines. There was no version of tonight where Crusher won. "Sit down," Torch said. Crusher sat. The police arrived 22 minutes later. The ambulance arrived 4 minutes after that. Deacon had already stabilized Shelley. She was breathing, conscious, confused, one eye swollen shut, 3 cracked ribs pressing against her left lung. He'd immobilized her neck as a precaution and covered her with a blanket pulled from the bed that wasn't stained with blood. When the paramedics took over, Deacon stepped back and washed his hands in the bathroom sink without looking at himself in the mirror. His hands were steady. They were always steady. That was the gift and the curse of being a man who could fix bodies while his own soul sat in the dark and waited. The police asked questions. Grave answered some and declined others. The officers recognized the Iron Saints cuts, and the dynamic shifted, not hostile but wary. Rural Virginia law enforcement and motorcycle clubs existed in a complicated détente built on mutual suspicion and occasional grudging respect. Tonight, the math was simple. 7 bikers had arrived before the police, stabilized a domestic violence victim, protected a child, and restrained the suspect without killing him. The restraint part had been harder than anyone would ever admit. One officer, a young deputy with clean boots and a flashlight, he kept pointing at the patches on the Saints' vests, approached Grave near the ambulance. "How'd you know to come here?" Grave held up the phone, showed him the text. The deputy read it. His flashlight beam lingered on the words. That wasn't meant for you." "No." "So why'd you come?" Grave looked at the ambulance where Leo sat on the bumper wrapped in a shock blanket, his small legs dangling above the wet pavement. A paramedic was checking his oxygen levels while Leo stared at nothing with the 1,000-yard gaze of a child who'd seen too much too early. "Because nobody else was going to get here in time," Grave said. The deputy looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, put his notebook away, and walked back to his cruiser. But the night wasn't over. Inside the ambulance, while the paramedics prepared to transport Shelley, Leo grabbed Grave's sleeve. The boy's grip was weak but absolute. The grip of someone holding on to the only solid thing in a world made of water. "He's going to come back," Leo whispered. "He always comes back." Grave looked down at the small hand clutching leather. "Not this time," he said. "You don't know him. He always—" "Leo." Grave's voice was quiet, but lined with something harder than steel, something forged in years of keeping promises to men who'd trusted him with their lives. "I don't need to know him. I know me, and I'm telling you, not this time." The ambulance doors closed. The rain kept falling. The police loaded Crusher into the back of a cruiser, and for one brief moment, as the car pulled away, Crusher's face was visible through the rain-streaked rear window, staring back at the motel, at the bikers, at the wreckage of a kingdom built on terrorizing a woman and her child. Then the taillights disappeared into the storm, and room 104 fell silent. Grave stood in the parking lot after everyone left. The other Saints waited by their bikes, engines off, rain soaking through leather to skin. Nobody rushed him. Nobody checked the time. They stood the way soldiers stand after contact, alert, quiet, processing the adrenaline with the patience of men who understood that some moments needed to breathe before they could be left behind. Torch finally spoke. "Hospital?" Grave nodded. They rode to Mercy General in formation. Slower now, steady, the thunder of their engines muffled by exhaustion and rain. The ER waiting room was fluorescent hell, white lights buzzing, plastic chairs bolted to the floor, a television playing infomercials to no one. The Saints took up one corner like an occupying force. Nurses stared. A security guard considered approaching, then reconsidered. Graves sat beside Leo in the pediatric intake area. The boy had been given a breathing treatment and was connected to a monitor that beeped with mechanical indifference. His eyes were open but far away. "Is my mom going to be okay?" Leo asked without looking up. "The doctors are working on her right now." "That's not an answer." Grave almost smiled. Almost. "You're right, it's not. But it's the truth. They're working on her, and they're good at what they do." Leo was quiet for a while. The monitor beeped. The vending machine in the hallway hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, a baby was crying. "Why did you come?" Leo finally asked. "You don't know me." Grave leaned back in the plastic chair. It creaked under his weight. He stared at the ceiling tiles, water-stained, cracked, institutional, and he thought about the answer, the real answer, the one that lived in a room inside his chest he hadn't opened in 7 years. "Because a long time ago," he said slowly, "somebody needed me to come, and I didn't get there fast enough." Leo looked at him. Grave didn't look back. He kept his eyes on the ceiling. But the scar on his jaw tightened, and somewhere behind his stillness, something old and heavy shifted. "So now," he continued, "when someone calls, I come." The monitor beeped. The rain fell. And in the fluorescent silence of Mercy General Hospital at 3:17 a.m., a scarred biker president and a 10-year-old boy sat side by side in plastic chairs, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and vending machine coffee. Two strangers connected by a wrong number and the stubborn refusal to let the darkness win. But 3 floors up, in the ICU, a nurse was making a phone call that would change everything. She wasn't calling a doctor. She was calling Crusher's brother, a man named Dale Beckett, who worked for the county's Department of Child Protective Services. A man who had buried 2 complaints against Crusher in the last 18 months. A man who had made sure that every time Shelley tried to get help, every time she called the hotline, every time she showed up at a shelter with bruises on her arms and terror in her eyes, the paperwork disappeared. And now Dale Beckett was about to learn that 7 bikers had done in 25 minutes what his entire system had been designed to prevent. Someone had saved Leo, and Dale was going to make sure it didn't stick. Dale Beckett got the call at 4:11 a.m. He was sitting in the kitchen of his split-level ranch house on Cutter Road, 14 miles east of the hospital, eating cold leftover spaghetti straight from the Tupperware because his wife had left him 9 months ago, and he'd stopped pretending meals mattered. The phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the number, Mercy General, ICU floor, and his jaw stopped moving mid-chew. He listened for 90 seconds, asked 2 questions, hung up. Then he sat very still in the blue light of the microwave clock and let the mathematics of self-preservation run through his mind like water finding cracks in a dam. 2 buried complaints. 1 shredded intake report from the Ridgeway Women's Shelter. 1 phone conversation with a family court judge named Arliss, who owed him a favor and didn't ask questions. 18 months of careful, invisible architecture designed to ensure that Wade Beckett's domestic situation never became an official situation. Because if Wade went down, Wade would talk. And if Wade talked, the things Dale had done with county funds and falsified case files would crawl out of the dark and eat him alive. Dale had protected his brother not out of love. Love had nothing to do with it. Dale had protected his brother because Wade was a grenade with the pin half pulled, and the only way to keep that grenade from going off was to keep it out of the system. And now 7 bikers had kicked down a motel door and shoved his brother directly into the system's mouth. He picked up the phone again and dialed. At Mercy General, the fluorescent lights hadn't changed, the vending machines hadn't stopped humming, and Grave hadn't moved from the plastic chair beside Leo's bed. The boy had fallen asleep around 3:40 a.m. Not peacefully, not the surrendering drift of a child who felt safe, but the abrupt shutdown of a body that had burned through every molecule of adrenaline it possessed and simply quit. His hand was still curled loosely around the edge of Grave's leather cut, fingers hooked into the worn fabric like an anchor. Grave sat motionless. He watched the monitor count the boy's heartbeats and tried not to think about another monitor, another hospital, another child who'd been carried out of smoke and flames with burns covering 60% of her body. Sarah. Her name was Sarah. He hadn't said it out loud in 7 years, but it sat behind his teeth every day like a coal that wouldn't cool. Deacon appeared in the doorway. He didn't knock. He leaned against the frame and crossed his arms and waited until Grave looked up. "Shelley's stable," Deacon said quietly. "Cracked ribs, orbital fracture, mild concussion, no internal bleeding. They're keeping her at least 48 hours. Grave nodded. "And the cops processed Crusher, domestic battery, aggravated assault, child endangerment. He's sitting in county lockup right now." "Bail?" "Arraignments tomorrow morning. Judge could set it anywhere from 10 to 50. He'll make 10. "Probably." Silence. The monitor beeped. Down the hall, someone coughed in their sleep. "There's something else," Deacon said. His voice dropped half a register, the voice he used when the news was going to hurt. "I talked to the intake nurse. She made a call right after they admitted Shelley. Not to social services, not to the on-call advocate. She called a personal number." Graves' eyes sharpened. "Whose?" "Dale Beckett, county CPS supervisor. Also, according to the arresting officer's notes, Wade Beckett's older brother." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, the way a chamber is loaded. Heavy with potential energy waiting for a trigger. "CPS," Graves said. "Yeah." "His brother?" "Yeah." Grave looked down at Leo's sleeping face. The boy's lips were slightly parted. His breathing was even now. The nebulizer had done its work, but there were dark circles under his eyes that no 10-year-old should carry. Circles that hadn't appeared in one night. Circles that took months, years, a lifetime of sleeping with one ear open and both fists clenched. "That's why nobody came," Graves said. Deacon nodded slowly. "That's what I'm thinking. Kid's been living in a war zone, mother's been trying to get out, and the system keeps sending her back. Doesn't happen by accident. It happens because someone inside the system makes it happen." "Yeah." Graves' hand closed into a fist on the armrest. Not fast. Not explosive. Just a slow, controlled compression that turned his scarred knuckles white and made the plastic creak beneath his grip. He held it for 5 seconds, then he released. "Get everyone to the clubhouse," he said. "Morning meeting, 8 a.m. Grave, 8 a.m. Deacon." Deacon studied him. They'd known each other 23 years, since a forward operating base in Kandahar, where the temperature hit 130, and the only shade came from the things you were trying not to die behind. Deacon had seen Grave make hard decisions in environments where hard decisions cost blood. He'd seen the calculations happen behind those gray eyes, cost, risk, consequence, and he'd learned to trust the math even when the math was terrifying. But he'd also seen what happened when Graves' math stopped being strategic and started being personal. "We got the kid out," Deacon said carefully. "Crusher's locked up. The system's got him now. We did our part. The system had him before. The system is what put him back in that bathtub. That's not our fight, Grave. It became our fight when his text hit my phone." Deacon opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "We're a motorcycle club. We're not investigators. We're not social workers. We're not the law." "No," Graves said. "We're not." The way he said it made Deacon's stomach tighten, because the subtext was clear. We're not the law, and that's exactly why we can do what needs to be done. Deacon left without another word. His boots echoed down the hospital corridor, steady and measured, and when the sound faded, Grave was alone again with a sleeping boy and the slow mechanical percussion of the heart monitor. He stayed until 6 a.m. A nurse brought him coffee, bitter, institutional, served in a styrofoam cup that burned his fingers. He drank it without tasting it. At some point, Shelley's doctor came by and asked if he was family. Graves said no. The doctor said only family could stay past visiting hours. Grave looked at him. The doctor reconsidered and moved on. At 5:47 a.m., Leo's eyes opened. For a moment, the boy didn't know where he was. His body tensed, the instantaneous combat readiness of a child who'd trained himself to wake up ready to run. His eyes darted to the corners of the room, to the door, to the window, mapping exits with the practiced speed of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. Then he saw Grave. His body relaxed. Not completely. Not the way a child relaxes when a parent walks in, but enough. The way a stray dog relaxes when it recognizes the one person who didn't throw a rock. You stayed, Leo said. I stayed. You didn't have to. I know. Leo looked at the IV taped to the back of his hand. He touched it gently with his other fingers, tracing the clear tube as if trying to understand the mechanics of being cared for. Is Crusher in jail? Yes. For how long? Grave paused. He could lie. He could offer comfort. He could say the things adults say to children when the truth is too sharp. A long time. Don't worry, you're safe now. But this boy had been lied to by every adult in his life. His mother had said Crusher would change. The system had said someone would help. His grandfather was 40 miles away, and the distance might as well have been an ocean. I don't know, Grave said. The court will decide. Leo's jaw tightened. It was a tiny movement, almost invisible, but Grave saw it. The micro-expression of a child learning, one more time, that honesty and comfort rarely came in the same package. He'll get out, Leo said. He always gets out. The words were flat, factual. The emotional register of a weather report delivered by someone who'd accepted that the weather would always be bad. Grave leaned forward in his chair. Leo, listen to me. I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. Has your mom ever called for help before? Social services? Police? Anything? Leo nodded. How many times? 3? Maybe 4? What happened? The boy's fingers tightened around the IV tube. A man came to the house once. He wore a tie and carried a clipboard. He talked to Crusher in the kitchen while Mom and I waited in the bedroom. Then he left, and nothing happened. Did the man say his name? Mom called him Mr. Beckett. Graves' face didn't change. Not a muscle. Not a flicker. But something behind his eyes locked into place like a bolt sliding home. And the other times? Mom went to a place once, a shelter. We stayed 2 nights. Then someone called and said there wasn't enough evidence for a case, and the funding for our stay was denied. So we went back. Back to Crusher. He was waiting at the house when we got there. He knew we'd been gone. He knew where we'd been. He said someone told him. The monitor beeped. The coffee grew cold. Coffee. And Graves sat in that plastic chair and felt the architecture of something monstrous take shape in his mind. Not the random cruelty of one violent man, but the engineered cruelty of a system that had been rigged to keep a woman and child trapped inside a cage with a predator. Dale Beckett hadn't just failed to protect Shelley and Leo. He'd actively prevented anyone else from protecting them. At 8:14 a.m., the Iron Saints gathered in the main room of their clubhouse, a converted auto body shop on the industrial edge of a town called Brecker that had seen better decades. The room smelled like motor oil, cold coffee, and the particular staleness of a space inhabited by men who didn't clean often enough. A long wooden table dominated the center, scarred with cigarette burns and beer rings. The walls were covered with old road maps, military unit patches, and photographs of members who'd died. 6 faces staring down from cheap frames with the permanent authority of the gone. 7 men sat around the table. Grave at the head, Deacon to his left, Torch to his right, his prosthetic hand resting on the table's surface, the metal fingers still and reflective under the hanging shop light. Bone, real name William Oates, 6'4", former Marine sniper, a man who spoke maybe 20 words a day and meant every single one of them, sat at the far end with a mug of black coffee he hadn't touched. Hatchet, Jake Drummond, the club's enforcer, a man with knuckles like walnuts and a divorce decree he kept folded in his wallet for reasons he never explained, leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed. Pike, Danny Colvin, youngest member at 31, a combat engineer who'd lost his hearing in his left ear to an IED in Helmand Province, sat with his good ear tilted slightly toward Grave, his body angled like a satellite dish. And Wren, Thomas Wren, the club's treasurer, a quiet man with reading glasses and a felony fraud conviction from a lifetime ago, had a yellow legal pad open in front of him with a pen that hadn't written anything yet. Grave told them everything. He told them about Leo's previous calls for help, about the man with the clipboard, Dale Beckett, who'd come to the house and left without acting, about the shelter stay that was cut short, about the leaked information, about the CPS supervisor who happened to share a last name with the man who'd beaten a woman unconscious and tried to kick through a bathroom door to reach her 10-year-old son. When he finished, the room was quiet. Torch's metal fingers tapped the table once. A single, reflexive click. Hatchet's chair creaked as he leaned forward. Bone didn't move. Deacon spoke first. "I need to say something, and I need everyone to hear it." "Say it," Graves said. "What you're describing, if it's true, is a county official using his position to suppress domestic violence complaints and protect an abuser. That's criminal. That's federal. That's the kind of thing that ends careers, ends lives, and ends anyone who gets close to it without the right tools. We're not the right tools." "Then what are we?" Hatchet said. "We're a motorcycle club, Jake. We were a motorcycle club 12 hours ago. Then we kicked in a door and pulled a kid out of a bathtub. What are we now?" Silence. Torch leaned forward. "I ran Dale Beckett through public records this morning. County employee, GS-12 equivalent, been with CPS 11 years. Married, divorced, no kids. 2 commendations for caseload management, clean on paper." "Clean on paper means someone cleaned the paper," Bone said. Everyone looked at him. Bone speaking unsolicited was rare enough to carry weight. "He's right," Wren said. He adjusted his reading glasses and tapped his legal pad. "If Dale buried complaints, there's a trail. CPS intake systems are logged. Case files have timestamps. Supervisor overrides leave digital fingerprints. If someone digs, they'll find it." "Someone isn't going to dig," Graves said. "This is a rural county with a 3-person oversight board and a DA who plays golf with the sheriff. Nobody's going to investigate a CPS supervisor because a motorcycle club says he's dirty." "So what are you proposing?" Deacon asked. His voice was steady, but his eyes were narrow. The expression of a man watching someone he trusted approach a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "I'm proposing we find the evidence ourselves and put it somewhere it can't be ignored." The room shifted. Not physically, atmospherically. The way air pressure changes before a storm. Invisible, but felt in the bones and the sinuses and the space between heartbeats. "That's not what we do," Deacon said. "What we do," Graves said, "is protect people who can't protect themselves. That's the code. That's the patch. That's the reason every man in this room put that leather on his back instead of eating a bullet when the world told him he was finished. We don't get to pick and choose when the code applies." "The code isn't a suicide pact, Grave. If we start digging into a county official, we're painting targets on every back in this room. We've got members with records. Torch is still on parole. Pike's custody hearing is in 6 weeks. You start a war with the county fights back, and they don't fight with fists." "They fight with paper," Wren said quietly. "Warrants, inspections, parole revocations. It's what they do." "I know what they do," Graves said. "Then you know the risk." "I know the risk." The silence that followed was the heaviest thing in the room, heavier than the table, heavier than the engine blocks sitting on the shop floor behind the partition wall. It sat on every man's chest like a hand pressing down, and each of them felt the moment for what it was, a fork in the road that didn't allow turning back. Torch broke it. "What about the kid?" Grave looked at him. "If Crusher makes bail and Dale's still running interference at CPS, what happens to Leo? The system sends him back. It sends Shelley back. And this time Crusher knows someone's watching. This time he'll be careful. And careful predators are worse than reckless ones because they plan. They isolate, they wait, and then they finish what they started in a place where nobody hears and nobody comes." Torch's prosthetic hand opened and closed once. A mechanical reflex. The ghost of a fist he'd lost in a city 12,000 miles away. "I've seen it before," Torch said. "Different country, same math. You save someone once and walk away, you haven't saved them. You've just delayed the ending." Pike nodded. He didn't speak often. The hearing loss made group conversations difficult, but his nod carried the same weight as a paragraph from anyone else. Hatchet slapped the table. Not hard, just enough to make the coffee mugs jump. "Vote it." Graves shook his head. "This isn't a vote. This is a choice every man makes for himself. If you're in, you ride with me. If you're out, nobody judges. Nobody remembers. You walk out that door and nothing changes between us." He paused, looked at each man. "Let the weight sit. But I'm going, with or without a vote. With or without every man in this room. Because that boy called me, and I answered. And that means something to me that I can't put into words without sounding like the kind of fool I probably am." Deacon stared at him for a long time. The distance between them wasn't 12 feet of scarred oak table. It was 23 years of shared history, shared blood, shared silence in places where silence was all that kept you sane. Deacon had pulled shrapnel from Grave's shoulder in a field hospital with no anesthesia. Grave had carried Deacon 3 miles through a contested valley when a bullet took his knee. They owed each other debts that couldn't be calculated and never needed to be. "You're a fool," Deacon said. "I know. And you're going to get us all jammed up." "Probably," Deacon sighed. It was the sigh of a man surrendering to something he'd known was inevitable from the moment he'd read a child's text message on a cracked phone screen in a dark clubhouse. "I'm in." Torch clicked his metal fingers against the table. "In." Bone raised his coffee mug an inch off the surface. "In." Pike nodded once. Hatchet grinned, a wolfish, reckless grin that belonged to a man who'd always preferred the wrong side of smart. "You even have to ask?" Wren uncapped his pen and wrote something on the legal pad. He turned it around so everyone could see. One word, unanimous. Grave didn't smile, didn't nod. He looked at the faces around the table. The scars, the fatigue, the quiet determination of men who'd already survived things that should have killed them and were apparently willing to do it again, and he felt something shift inside the iron architecture of his chest. Not warmth, not comfort. Something harder than either of those. Something that felt like purpose grinding its gears awake after years of rust. "Wren, I need everything you can pull on Dale Beckett. Public records, county filings, CPS case assignment logs. Legal. Nothing that puts us on the wrong side of a warrant." Wren nodded and was already writing. "Torch, I need the layout of the CPS office, where it is, what hours it keeps, who works the front desk." "I'll have it by noon." "Deacon, you're back at the hospital. Stay with Leo and Shelley. If anyone from CPS shows up, anyone, you call me. Don't let them near that kid alone." Deacon stood and grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. He paused at the door. "And if Dale shows up personally?" "Then you look him in the eye and you remember his face. Because before this is done, he's going to wish he'd never picked up that phone at 4 a.m. The meeting broke. Men moved to their assignments with the quiet efficiency of a unit that had operated under pressure before and understood that urgency didn't require noise. The clubhouse emptied. Engines fired outside, 1, 2, 3, and then the rumble of departing Harleys faded into the cold November morning. Grave stayed behind. He sat alone at the scarred table in the suddenly quiet room and stared at the phone still sitting in front of him. The screen was dark now. The text message, "Whoa, please come now. Room 104 Trails End Motel Route 9. He's hurting us, please," was still there, archived in the thread, permanent as a scar. He picked up the phone and scrolled to his photo gallery. He almost never opened it. The gallery contained 6 photographs, all taken before the fire. 4 of them showed a little girl with dark hair and a gap-toothed smile standing in various locations. A park, a kitchen, a backyard, the seat of a motorcycle far too big for her. Sarah at 5. Sarah at 6. Sarah at 7. Sarah on the last birthday she'd ever have. He looked at the 5th photo. Sarah asleep on the couch, a blanket pulled up to her chin, one small hand dangling over the edge. Peaceful. Safe. Unaware that the wiring in the old house was already failing, already sparking inside the walls like a countdown nobody could hear. 4 minutes. He'd been 4 minutes away when the call came. 4 minutes on the highway. 4 minutes that stretched into a distance so vast and permanent that no amount of writing would ever close it. Last night, when Leo's text arrived, the ride to the motel had taken 25 minutes. But he'd made it. He closed the gallery, pocketed the phone, stood up, and walked toward the door where the morning light cut a sharp diagonal across the concrete floor. At Mercy General, the thing Grave feared was already beginning. Deacon arrived at 9:20 a.m. to find a man standing outside Shelley's room. Mid-40s, thin, wearing a county lanyard and carrying a manila folder. He had the posture of a bureaucrat and the eyes of something colder. His shoes were clean, his fingernails were trimmed. Everything about him was controlled, calibrated, and intentionally forgettable. "Can I help you?" Deacon said. The man looked at him, at the leather cut, the patches. the military tattoo visible above the collar of his shirt, and his expression didn't change. Not surprise, not wariness, nothing. The practiced blankness of a man who'd trained himself to show exactly as much as he intended, and not one molecule more. I'm Dale Beckett, Rockbridge County Child Protective Services. I'm here to check on the minor, Leo Mercer. At 9 in the morning? On a case that was filed 6 hours ago? Early follow-up is standard protocol for cases involving minors with hospitalized guardians. Is it also standard protocol to be the brother of the man who put that guardian in the hospital? Dale's mask slipped. Not much. A hairline fracture, the briefest tightening around his mouth, the smallest contraction of his pupils, a micro-expression that lasted less than a second. But Deacon had been trained to read faces in combat zones where a wrong read meant death. He saw it, he cataloged it, and he understood exactly what it meant. Dale Beckett was not here to protect Leo. Dale Beckett was here to assess the damage, to determine how much was known, how much could be contained, and how quickly the machinery of his carefully constructed cover could be deployed to grind this situation back into silence. "I'd like to see the child now," Dale said. "No." The word hung in the hallway like a closed door. "I'm a county official conducting a welfare check. You don't have the authority to—" "I'm a friend of the family, and I'm telling you that boy is sleeping. His mother is in the ICU, and nobody is seeing him until the doctor clears it." "The doctor has already cleared." "Then I'm not clearing it. Take it up with the nursing station." Dale stared at him. The bureaucratic veneer held, but beneath it, something was calculating. The rapid, silent mathematics of a man who was used to controlling rooms and had just encountered a wall he hadn't anticipated. "I'll be back," Dale said. "I know you will." Dale turned and walked down the corridor. His shoes made no sound on the linoleum. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He already knew what he was going to do. Deacon waited until the elevator doors closed. Then he pulled out his phone and called Grave. "He's here, already." How did he look? Like a man counting his cards. Silence on the line. Then Grave's voice, low and even and cold as the November wind outside the hospital windows. "Then we need to count ours faster." 2 floors below, in the hospital's administrative office, Dale Beckett was already on the phone with Judge Warren Arliss, the same judge who'd quietly dismissed 2 protection orders at Dale's request over the past 18 months. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. At the end of it, Judge Arliss agreed to set Crusher's bail at $5,000, a number low enough to guarantee release by morning. And on the yellow legal pad tucked inside Dale's manila folder, a handwritten note that no filing system would ever record: emergency custody transfer, minor Leo Mercer, petition to court by Thursday. Grounds: guardian incapacitation, no suitable family placement, recommended placement, foster system, Route 7, group home. The Route 7 group home was a facility Dale had used before, a facility where children went quiet, a facility where paperwork vanished and complaints dissolved, and the man who ran it, a retired corrections officer named Garvin, understood that some children were placed not to be protected, but to be forgotten. Leo Mercer was about to disappear into a hole no wrong number could reach, and the only people standing between him and that hole were 7 men on motorcycles who had no authority, no legal standing, and no idea how deep the ground beneath them was about to open. Crusher walked out of Rockbridge County Jail at 7:42 a.m. on Thursday morning. $5,000. That was the price tag the system had placed on Shelley Mercer's shattered orbital bone, her cracked ribs, her son's collapsed lungs, and the bathroom door he'd kicked off its hinges to get to a 10-year-old boy. $5,000 posted by a bondsman Dale had used before. A quiet transaction completed in cash at 6:15 a.m. No questions asked, no victim notification triggered, no flag raised in any system that mattered. Crusher stood in the parking lot under a sky the color of ash and lit a cigarette with steady hands. He wore the same clothes he'd been arrested in. Blood still on the cuffs of his flannel shirt, Shelley's blood, dried to the color of rust. He didn't look at the jail behind him. He looked at the road ahead. And the expression on his face wasn't relief, it was inventory. The slow, methodical scan of a man counting what he'd lost and calculating what it would cost to take it back. A black sedan pulled up. Dale was behind the wheel. Crusher got in without a word. They drove in silence for 3 miles before Dale spoke. You need to listen to me very carefully. I'm listening. There are bikers involved, a club called the Iron Saints. They showed up at the motel before the police. They're the ones who called it in. And right now, one of them is sitting outside Shelley's hospital room, refusing to let anyone from my office near the boy. Crusher's cigarette paused halfway to his mouth. Bikers. 7 of them. Their president, a man named Maddox, he's the one who responded. The kid sent a text to a wrong number and it landed on this guy's phone. A wrong number. Yeah. Crusher took a long drag, exhaled, watched the smoke flatten against the windshield. So some random biker gets a text from my kid and decides to play hero. And now he's sitting in a hospital acting like he matters. He's doing more than sitting. He's asking questions. The one at the hospital, the VP, he already knows your name and mine. He knows I'm CPS. He knows we're related. These aren't stupid men, Wade. They're veterans, organized, and they're not going away. Then make them go away. That's what you do. Dale's grip tightened on the steering wheel. What I do requires systems. Systems require time. And right now, time is the one thing we don't have, because I've got a judge who's already nervous and a custody petition that needs to be filed before anyone starts pulling my case history. Custody petition? For Leo. Emergency transfer into the foster system. I've already identified a placement, Route 7 Group Home. Once he's in the system under my jurisdiction, the bikers have no standing, no access, and no leverage. The mother's incapacitated, the grandfather's not in the picture, and by the time anyone figures out what happened, the boy's a file number in a cabinet nobody opens. Crusher looked at his brother. The cigarette burned between his fingers, a thin column of ash growing longer with each second he didn't flick it. You're going to take my kid and bury him in a group home. I'm going to make the problem disappear. The same way I made the last 3 problems disappear. The same way I've kept you out of prison for 18 months while you turned a woman's face into modern art every other weekend. You don't get to be selective about my methods, Wade. Not anymore. The ash fell from the cigarette into Crusher's lap. He didn't brush it away. Fine, he said. Do it. The sedan turned onto Route 7 and headed east, toward a future that had already been written in a dead man's handwriting on a yellow legal pad. At the Iron Saints clubhouse, the world was contracting. Wren had been awake since 5 a.m., sitting in the back room they used as an office. A converted storage closet with a metal desk, a laptop older than some of the club's prospects, and a printer that jammed every 3rd page. The room smelled like toner and cold coffee, and the particular strain of anxiety that comes from looking at information you wish you hadn't found. He'd started with public records. Dale Beckett's employment history, county payroll records, property filings. Standard stuff, clean stuff. The kind of paper trail a careful man leaves when he wants the world to see a dedicated public servant with 11 years of service and 2 commendations. Then Wren went deeper. Not illegally. Wren was precise about that distinction. He'd done 5 years for wire fraud in his 30s, and the experience had taught him exactly where the line was. He stayed on the legal side. But the legal side, if you knew where to look, contained more information than most people realized. Court records, public hearing transcripts, annual CPS performance audits posted to the county website in PDF format that nobody ever read. Complaint logs obtained through Freedom of Information requests that had been fulfilled and archived by a local newspaper that went defunct 3 years ago, but whose digital archive was still accessible. By 7 a.m., Wren had a picture. By 8 a.m., the picture made him sick. When Grave walked into the back office at 8:30, Wren was standing at the window with his reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead and his hands flat on the desk. The printer had spit out 14 pages. They were arranged in 3 rows across the desk's surface, organized chronologically. "Talk to me," Grave said. Wren didn't turn from the window. Dale Beckett has been CPS supervisor for the Eastern District of Rockbridge County for 11 years. In that time, he's been assigned or has overseen approximately 640 cases involving minors. And his closure rate is exceptional. 92% of his cases are resolved within 90 days. That's 30 points above the state average. It's why he got the commendations. That sounds like a good thing. It is a good thing if the cases are being resolved. but I cross-referenced his closure data with the county's repeat complaint index, the number of times the same family generates a new complaint after a case is closed. Grave waited. Dale's repeat complaint rate is 4%. The state average is 23%. 4%. 4%. Which means that either Dale Beckett is the greatest child welfare officer in the history of Virginia, resolving cases so thoroughly that families almost never re-enter the system, or he's closing cases without resolving them and ensuring that the complaints never get filed again. The room was quiet except for the hum of the laptop's overworked fan. "There's more," Wren said. He turned from the window. His face was pale under the fluorescent light, and his reading glasses caught the glare in a way that made his eyes look hollow. "I found the newspaper archive, the Rockbridge Courier. It shut down in 2023, but before it did, a reporter named Alina Cross filed a FOIA request for CPS case data. The county released redacted summaries, 300 pages. I've been reading them since 6 this morning." He picked up a page from the desk. His hand was steady, but his voice was not. "In the last 8 years, 14 children from Dale's caseload were transferred to the Route 7 group home. 14. That's more than any other placement facility in the district by a factor of 3. Route 7. It's a privately operated group home on the eastern edge of the county, run by a man named Garvin Poole, former corrections officer. The facility has a capacity of 12 and an occupancy rate that fluctuates between 8 and 10. It receives county funding on a per-child basis, approximately $38,000 per year per placement." Graves' eyes narrowed. 38,000 times 14 children, over 8 years. Do the math. Grave didn't need to. The math was already running behind his eyes, and the answer wasn't a number. It was a shape, the shape of a pipeline, a funnel, a system designed to move children from families in crisis into a facility that generated revenue for every head it counted and answered to a supervisor who made sure the heads kept coming. "What do we know about the home?" Grave asked. "Almost nothing. That's the problem. Route 7 has passed every state inspection for the last 6 years. No complaints on file, no incident reports, no negative press. No complaints in 6 years for a group home housing 8 to 10 children. None. That's not clean. That's scrubbed. That's what I thought." Grave picked up one of the printed pages. It was a redacted case summary. Names blacked out, dates visible, disposition codes listed in a column on the right. His eyes moved down the column. Closed. 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 Transferred. Closed. Transferred. Route 7. Closed. Transferred. Route 7. Every transfer notation carried the same supervisor authorization code, DB7714. Dale Beckett's employee ID. "Where's the reporter?" Grave asked. "The one who filed the FOIA. Alina Cross left the Courier when it folded. I found a LinkedIn profile. She's freelancing now, based in Harrisonburg, about an hour and a half from here. Can you reach her?" "Already left a message." Grave set the page down. He looked at the 14 pages spread across the desk, the paper trail of a man who'd spent nearly a decade routing vulnerable children into a facility that existed, as far as Grave could tell, primarily to receive the money attached to their names. A facility run by a man whose background was in locking people up, not caring for them. A facility that generated no complaints because the person responsible for receiving complaints was the same person placing the children there. "Wren." "Yeah." "Leo's name is on Dale's desk right now. Emergency custody petition. Route 7 placement." Wren's pen stopped moving. He looked at Grave over the top of his reading glasses, and for a moment, the former accountant and the former soldier shared an understanding that required no words. The kind of understanding that happens when two men look at the same blueprint and realize simultaneously that the building they're standing in is on fire. "How long do we have?" Wren asked. "Deacon says Dale was at the hospital yesterday morning. If he filed the petition with Judge Arliss, the hearing could happen as early as tomorrow." "Tomorrow." "Tomorrow." Wren sat down. He took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and put them back on. "We need the reporters. If Alina Cross has documentation beyond what the FOIA produced, Notes, interviews, source contacts, that's the only leverage that moves fast enough. Get her. At Mercy General, the pressure was building from a different direction. Deacon had been in the hallway outside Shelley's room since dawn. He'd eaten a granola bar from the vending machine and drunk 3 cups of coffee that tasted like hot cardboard. His knee ached. The old wound, the one that had ended his army career and started his life as a man who fixed bodies that weren't his own, because fixing his own was no longer possible. He shifted his weight against the wall and watched the corridor with the patience of a man who'd spent months watching empty roads for movement. At 10:15 a.m., a woman appeared at the end of the hallway. She wasn't Dale. She wasn't police. She was small, mid-30s, wearing a blazer over a blouse that hadn't been ironed and carrying a clipboard thick with forms. Her county ID badge read Carol Penn, Rockbridge County, DCS. She approached Shelley's door. Deacon straightened. "I'm here to conduct a welfare assessment on the minor Leo Mercer," she said. Her voice was rehearsed, but her eyes were not. Her eyes kept flickering to his leather cut, to the patches, to his face, then away. Nervous. Following a script she didn't write. "Who sent you?" Deacon asked. "This is a standard..." "Who sent you?" The woman's clipboard tilted slightly. A reflexive tell. The body's way of creating a barrier when the mouth can't. "My supervisor, Dale Beckett." Dale Beckett, whose brother beat this child's mother unconscious 2 days ago. Carol Penn's face changed. Not the calculated blankness Dale had worn. Something different. Something that looked, for one fraction of a second, like someone who'd just been told a piece of information that rearranged the furniture in a room she thought she knew. I wasn't aware of that relationship. Deacon studied her. Combat triage wasn't just about bodies. It was about reading situations, separating the salvageable from the lost, identifying who could be saved and who was already gone. Carol Penn wasn't gone. She was a mid-level caseworker following orders from a supervisor she trusted, and she'd just learned that the trust might be misplaced. "His name is Wade Beckett," Deacon said quietly. "Dale's younger brother. He's the one who put Shelley Mercer in the ICU, and Dale has been burying complaints against him for 18 months. Carol's clipboard lowered an inch. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation. It's a pattern. And right now, your supervisor is trying to file an emergency custody petition to move Leo into the foster system before anyone asks why his previous calls for help never went anywhere." The corridor was empty. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A food cart rattled somewhere in the distance. "I can't," Carol started. Stopped. Started again. "I can't just take your word for this. Who are you exactly?" "I'm the man who held Shelley Mercer's head still so she wouldn't choke on her own blood while your department was sleeping." That landed. Deacon saw it hit. The flinch, the tightening around her mouth. The moment when abstract professional procedure collided with the physical reality of a woman choking on blood in a motel room. "I need to see the child," Carol said. But the rehearsed quality was gone. She was asking now, not reciting. Deacon considered. Then he stepped aside. 5 minutes, and I'm staying in the room." Carol walked in. Leo was sitting up in bed watching a muted television mounted on the wall. He looked at Carol with the immediate, reflexive wariness of a child who'd learned that adults with clipboards were not allies. "Hi, Leo. My name is Carol. I'm just here to see how you're doing." Leo looked at Deacon. Deacon nodded once. Leo turned back to Carol but didn't speak. "Can you tell me how you're feeling today?" "Fine." "Are you eating okay?" "They gave me Jell-O." "Do you feel safe here?" Leo's eyes moved to the window, then to the door, then back to Carol. The exit mapping. The unconscious survival calculation that Deacon recognized from soldiers in hostile territory. "I feel safe when he's here," Leo said, pointing at Deacon. Carol wrote something on her clipboard. Her hand paused. She looked at the boy. Really looked. Past the assessment form. Past the checkboxes. Past the professional distance she'd been trained to maintain. She looked at a 10-year-old child sitting in a hospital bed who had just told a county caseworker that the only person who made him feel safe was a biker he'd known for 2 days. "Leo, has anyone from the county come to see you before? Before this, I mean. At home?" The man with the clipboard, Mr. Beckett. And what happened when he came? He talked to Crusher in the kitchen. Then he left. Then Crusher got mad. Carol's pen stopped. Mad at who? At Mom. He said she was the one who called. He said Mr. Beckett told him. Then he broke the lamp and we didn't have light for a week. The clipboard shook, barely. A tremor so slight that only someone trained to read micromovements would notice. Deacon noticed. Carol finished the assessment in silence. She smiled at Leo, a thin, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes because what was behind her eyes was no longer professional, and walked out of the room. In the hallway, she stood very still for a moment. Then she looked at Deacon. I need to see whatever documentation you have, she said. Her voice was different now, lower. The voice of a woman who had just realized she was standing inside a machine she'd trusted, and the machine had teeth. Come to the Iron Saints clubhouse, tonight. Bring whatever access you have to the CPS internal database. And Carol, she looked at him. Don't tell Dale. She left without answering. Deacon watched her walk to the elevator, watched the doors close, and pulled out his phone. Grave answered on the first ring. The crack in the wall just got wider, Deacon said. We might have someone on the inside. Might? She's scared, but she's angry. And angry people do brave things. Angry people also do stupid things. Yeah, but right now she's all we've got. At 4:30 p.m., the phone at the clubhouse rang. Wren answered. The voice on the other end was female, cautious, and precise. This is Alina Cross. Someone from your number left me a message about Dale Beckett and the Rockbridge CPS. Wren covered the receiver and looked at Grave. Grave nodded. Wren uncovered the phone. Ms. Cross, thank you for calling back. We have some questions about your FOIA request from 2022. I have questions too, starting with why a motorcycle club is interested in a county CPS supervisor, because he's trying to put a 10-year-old boy into a facility we think is being used as a funding pipeline, and we have about 20 hours to stop it. Silence on the line, the kind of silence that journalists maintain when they're deciding whether the story in front of them is real. Route 7, Alina said. Wren's grip tightened on the phone. You know about it. I spent 3 months investigating it before the paper went under. I had a source, a former staff member, who told me things that would make you sick. Children being neglected, medical needs ignored, educational records falsified to maintain enrollment numbers and keep the funding coming. And at the center of all of it, Garvin Poole, who treated the place like a warehouse and treated the children like inventory. Why didn't you publish? Because my source disappeared. Not figuratively. Literally. Moved out of state overnight. Phone disconnected. 2 weeks later, my editor killed the story because we couldn't corroborate without the source. And a month after that, the paper folded. I've been sitting on this for 3 years with a box of notes and no outlet. You have a box of notes. I have interview transcripts, financial analysis, placement pattern charts, and a sworn affidavit from the source that was signed before they vanished. I never turned it over to authorities because the authority in question is Dale Beckett. Grave took the phone from Wren's hand. Ms. Cross, my name is Ronan Maddox. I run the Iron Saints MC. 3 nights ago, a 10-year-old boy named Leo Mercer sent a wrong number text to my phone while a man was kicking through a bathroom door to get to him. That man is Dale Beckett's brother. Dale has been bearing CPS complaints to protect him. And right now, Dale is filing a custody petition to send Leo to Route 7 group home. The hearing is tomorrow morning. He paused. Let it land. I need that box. Alina Cross was quiet for 6 seconds. In the background, Grave could hear traffic. She was driving, probably on the highway between Harrisonburg and wherever the day had taken her. I'll be there in 90 minutes, she said. Give me the address. The clubhouse that night felt like a command post before an operation. Wren had cleared the main table and covered it with his research. Torch had returned with the layout of the CPS office and a list of employees. Bones sat in the corner sharpening a knife he didn't need to sharpen because it was the only way he knew how to sit still. Pike was on his phone texting Deacon for updates from the hospital. Hatchet paste. Carol Penn arrived at 7 p.m. She came in a civilian car, no county ID visible, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt instead of her blazer. She looked like a woman who'd spent the afternoon arguing with herself, and the argument had ended in a draw. Alina Cross arrived at 7:20 p.m. She was taller than her LinkedIn photo suggested. Early 40s, sharp-faced, carrying a cardboard box stuffed with manila folders and a laptop bag slung over one shoulder. She walked into the clubhouse, looked around at the leather cuts and the engine parts and the photographs of dead men on the wall, and showed no reaction at all. The woman had spent years in newsrooms and courtrooms. A biker clubhouse was furniture. Grave put them at the table, Carol on one side, Alina on the other. 7 bikers around the perimeter. The overhead shop light cast hard shadows across every face. "You two need to hear each other," Grave said. "Carol, tell her what Leo said today. Alina, show her what's in the box. And someone make a pot of coffee, because nobody's sleeping tonight." What happened over the next 3 hours dismantled every assumption in the room. Alina opened the box and laid out 3 years of work. Placement charts showing the Route 7 pipeline. A clear pattern of children from Dale's caseload being funneled into Garvin Pool's facility at 3 times the rate of any other supervisor in the district. Financial records showing the per-child funding flowing from the county to Route 7, totaling over $2 million across 8 years. Interview transcripts from the vanished source, a former caretaker named Maria Solis, who'd worked at Route 7 for 14 months before fleeing the state, describing conditions that made Torch's jaw clench and Bones' knife go still. Children sleeping on bare mattresses. Medical appointments canceled, school enrollment records fabricated. And at the center of it all, Garvin Pool, a man who treated his charges not as children, but as line items, revenue units that needed to be kept alive and quiet and invisible. Carol listened, at first with professional skepticism, then with growing horror, then with the specific, grinding fury of a person who realizes they've been complicit in something monstrous without knowing it. "I've worked under Dale for 3 years," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've processed his case closures. I've signed off on his placement recommendations. I thought he was good at his job. I thought the numbers meant he was saving families." "The numbers meant he was burying them," Alina said. Carol put her face in her hands. The room was silent, the kind of silence that follows a detonation. Not the explosion itself, but the moment after, when the dust is still in the air and the shape of the damage is just beginning to emerge. Grave broke it. "Can we stop the hearing?" Alina shook her head. "Not directly. A custody petition moves through family court. Judge Arliss signs the order. Even if Carol files a conflict of interest complaint, the bureaucratic timeline is weeks. The hearing is in 12 hours. Then we go to the judge." But Judge Arliss has been rubber-stamping Dale's petitions for years. He's either compromised or lazy. Either way, he's not an ally. The DA? Same problem. Small county, small network. Everyone knows everyone. Nobody's going to blow up a colleague based on a journalist's unpublished notes and a biker's word. Graves' fist hit the table. Not hard, not dramatic. A single, measured impact that made the coffee mugs tremble and the room tighten. "Then who?" Alina looked at him. "There is one option. The State Attorney General's office has an oversight division for county child welfare agencies. They have the authority to issue emergency injunctions that freeze custody proceedings, but they don't move on rumors. They move on evidence. Documented, verifiable, legally admissible evidence. You have a box full of evidence. I have a box full of journalism. It's not the same thing. What I need is someone inside the system, someone with access to the actual CPS database, to pull Dale's case files, his override logs, his placement authorizations, digital records with timestamps and supervisor codes. That's the evidence that triggers an injunction." Every eye in the room moved to Carol Penn. She was still sitting with her face in her hands. The sweatshirt she'd worn to be invisible now felt like a spotlight. She could feel the weight of 7 bikers and a journalist, and 3 years of buried truth pressing down on her shoulders like gravity doubling. She raised her head. "If I access those files and give them to you, I lose my job. I lose my pension. I probably lose my career. And if Dale finds out before the Attorney General acts, I lose more than that." "If you don't," Graves said, "a 10-year-old boy disappears into Route 7 tomorrow morning. And he's not the first. He's number 15. Carol looked at him, at the scar, at the leather, at the patches and the scars and the quiet weight of men who had lost things they couldn't name and were still standing. "Why do you care?" she asked. "You don't know this boy. You don't know his mother. A wrong number brought you into this. You could have deleted it. You could have called the police and gone back to sleep. Why are you here?" The room waited. Grave reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. He opened the gallery, scrolled to the 5th photograph, the one of Sarah, asleep on the couch, one small hand dangling. He set it on the table, screen up, and slid it across to Carol. She looked down. Her eyes moved across the image. The sleeping child, the blanket, the peaceful stillness of a moment that no longer existed. "My daughter," Graves said. 7 years ago. She died in a house fire because I was 4 minutes late." The shop light hummed. Nobody breathed. "I'm here because last Tuesday I wasn't late, and I'm not going to be late again." Carol Penn stared at the photograph for 11 seconds. Grave counted them the way he'd once counted incoming rounds, with a precision that was less about measurement and more about the body's insistence on marking time when everything else was falling apart. Then she reached for the laptop bag she'd brought in and opened it. "I have remote access to the CPS database from my county login," she said. Her voice shook, but her hands did not. "It takes about an hour to pull the files. Dale will see the access log by morning, which means we have tonight. Only tonight." She looked at Alina. "Once I give you this, there's no going back. For any of us." Alina opened her laptop. "Then we'd better not waste the dark." Outside the clubhouse, the November wind tore across the empty parking lot, and somewhere on the other side of the county, a judge was sleeping and a predator was free, and a 10-year-old boy was lying awake in a hospital bed staring at the ceiling, counting the hours until the world decided what happened to him next. Inside the clubhouse, Carol Penn logged into the system that had been her career, her identity, her belief in the essential goodness of the work she did, and began pulling it apart, file by file, record by record, truth by terrible truth. And the evidence that filled the screen was worse than any of them had imagined. Because it wasn't just Dale, and it wasn't just Route 7. Buried in the override logs, connected by a web of authorization codes and co-signatures and interdepartmental memos that were never meant to see daylight, was a third name, a name that changed everything. Judge Warren Arliss. Not rubber stamping, not lazy, not negligent. Arliss was a co-signer on Garvin Pool's facility license, a silent partner in the company that owned the Route 7 property, a man who sat on the bench that approved the placements he personally profited from, signing custody orders that moved children from their families into a facility that put money in his pocket with every head it counted. The judge wasn't just complicit, the judge was the architect, and he was scheduled to sit in his own courtroom in 11 hours to sign Leo Mercer into the machine he'd built. Nobody spoke for 47 seconds after the name appeared on the screen. 47 seconds is not a long time. It is the time it takes to pour a cup of coffee, to tie a boot, to light a cigarette, and take the first drag. But inside the Iron Saints clubhouse at 10:38 p.m. on a Thursday night in November, those 47 seconds stretched across the room like a wire pulled to breaking, and every man sitting around that table felt the tension in his chest, in his jaw, in the place behind his eyes where the body stores things it doesn't want the face to show. Judge Warren Arliss, co-signer on Garvin Pool's facility license, silent partner in the LLC that owned the Route 7 property, a man who had been approving custody placements into his own financial pipeline for the better part of a decade, signing orders from a bench that should have been a courtroom but was functioning as a cash register. Wren broke the silence. His voice was flat and dry. The voice of a man who'd spent 5 years in federal prison for financial fraud and recognized the architecture of corruption the way an electrician recognizes wiring. The LLC is called Mountain Laurel Properties, registered in 2016. 2 listed partners, Garvin Pool and a holding entity called Ridgeline Capital Management. Ridgeline is registered to a P.O. box in Staunton. The filing agent is a law firm called Arliss and Webb. His own firm, Torch said, his father's firm. Warren Arliss inherited the practice and the judgeship. Both have been in the family for 32 years. The firm is technically inactive, but the Ridgeline holding entity routes its annual payments through the firm's escrow account. It's a closed loop. Dale places children. Arliss approves the placement. Route 7 collects the funding. The funding flows back through Ridgeline to an escrow account controlled by a firm that bears the judge's name. But Carol Penn sat at the table with her laptop open and her face the color of ash. She'd pulled 63 case files in the last 2 hours. 63 override logs bearing Dale's authorization code, each one a child redirected from family reunification or kinship placement into institutional care at Route 7. 63 timestamps. 63 names she'd never questioned because she'd believed in the system the way people believe in floors, unconsciously, fundamentally, until the moment they fall through. How much? Grave asked. Wren adjusted his glasses. Based on the per-child annual funding rate and the average length of placement, which Dale keeps conveniently long, between 14 and 36 months, the total revenue flowing through Route 7 over the last 8 years is approximately $4.2 million. The number hit the room like a physical object. Not because it was large in the abstract, $4 million was pocket change for a real criminal enterprise, but because the currency behind those numbers wasn't dollars, it was children. 63 children who had been currency. Products. Revenue units warehoused in a facility that existed to count them and collect the check. Alina was writing fast. Her pen moved across a legal pad with the manic precision of a journalist who could see the story assembling itself in real time and understood that the window to capture it was closing with every minute Dale's database sat exposed. I can have this ready for the Attorney General's office by 6 a.m., she said. Digital case files, financial routing, corporate filings, the affidavit from Maria Solis, and Carol's database pulls with timestamps. It's enough to trigger an emergency review, possibly an injunction. Possibly, Graves said. I won't lie to you. The AG's office moves fast for a government agency, but fast for a government agency is still slow. They receive the package at 6. They assign a reviewer. The reviewer reads, consults legal, and decides whether to petition for an injunction. Best case, absolute best case, that injunction lands by noon. The hearing is at 9. I know. So we have a 3-hour gap. At minimum. Graves stood. The chair scraped against the concrete floor, a sound like a blade being drawn. He walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot where 7 Harleys sat in a row under the single security light, their chrome catching the weak glow like bones catching moonlight. 3 hours. 9 a.m. to noon. 3 hours during which Judge Arliss would sit in his courtroom and sign a custody order transferring Leo Mercer into the foster system. 3 hours during which Dale would execute the placement. 3 hours during which a 10-year-old boy would be loaded into a county vehicle and driven to a facility where children went quiet and stayed quiet, and the man who ran it didn't care whether they lived or simply didn't die. 3 hours was a lifetime. 3 hours was 4 minutes multiplied by 45. And Grave had already learned what 4 minutes could cost. We can't let the hearing happen, he said. Deacon's voice came through the speakerphone. He was still at the hospital, still positioned outside Shelley's room, still running on vending machine coffee, and the particular stubbornness of a man who had decided that leaving his post was not an option. How exactly do you stop a judge from holding a hearing in his own courthouse? You don't stop the hearing, Alina said. She set down her pen. You make the hearing irrelevant. If the AG's injunction is filed before the order is executed, before Leo is physically transferred, the injunction supersedes the custody order. The hearing can happen, Arliss can sign whatever he wants. But if the state steps in before the placement is carried out, the order is frozen. So we need to keep Leo out of their hands, Torch said. That's the play. We don't fight the court, we protect the kid. Buy time. Buy time, Grave repeated. He turned from the window. Deacon, what's Shelley's status? Conscious, coherent, scared out of her mind? She knows Crusher made bail, one of the nurses told her. Has she been informed about the custody petition? Not officially. Dale's keeping it quiet until the hearing. Then we inform her, tonight. If Shelley is conscious and coherent, she has the right to contest the petition. She can request a continuance, demand a different judge, or designate a temporary guardian of her choosing. The room shifted. Wren looked up from his legal pad with the expression of a man watching someone navigate a minefield with surprising precision. Designate a guardian, Wren said slowly. I mean, Shelley named someone she trusts to have temporary physical custody of Leo until she's released from the hospital. If the guardian is in place before the hearing, Dale's petition has no emergency basis. The child isn't unattended. The child isn't at risk. The petition collapses. And who exactly is she going to designate? Deacon asked through the speaker. She doesn't have family in the area. Harold, the grandfather, is 40 miles south and 82 years old. There's no one. There's us. The speakerphone crackled with Deacon's silence. It was a loaded silence. The silence of a man processing an idea that was simultaneously insane and inevitable. You want Shelley Mercer to designate an outlaw motorcycle club president as temporary guardian of her 10-year-old son. I want Shelley Mercer to designate the man who answered her son's call and kept him alive. The label on my jacket is irrelevant. What matters is whether she trusts me. And if she does, then the law gives her the right to make that choice. Grave, no family court in Virginia is going to look at a... It doesn't have to survive family court. It has to survive 3 hours. 3 hours, Deacon. That's the gap between the hearing and the injunction. If Shelley signs a temporary guardianship designation before 9 a.m., Dale's emergency petition loses its teeth. Arliss can still hold the hearing, but he's ruling on a child who already has a legal guardian in place. It changes the calculation. Alina was nodding. It's thin. Legally, it's tissue paper. But tissue paper can slow a machine long enough for the real machinery to catch up. And if the AG's injunction lands while the hearing is still in progress, or before the transfer is executed, it's over. Arliss can't place a child who's under state review. Will Shelley sign? Torch asked. Grave looked at the speakerphone. Deacon? A long pause. The sound of Deacon breathing. The distant hum of hospital equipment. I'll talk to her. The phone went quiet. Grave looked at the clock on the wall, an old shop clock with grease stains on its face, and a second hand that ticked with the exhausted persistence of something that had been keeping time long after anyone cared what time it was, 10:57 p.m. 10 hours and 3 minutes until the hearing. Everyone has a job, Grave said. Alina, you finish the package for the AG. Wren, you help her. Formatting, indexing, whatever she needs. Carol, you stay on the database until we have every file Dale's ever touched. Torch, I need you at the courthouse by 5 a.m. I want to know who enters that building before the hearing starts. Bone, you're with me. Hatchet, Pike, you go to the hospital at dawn. If anyone from the county tries to transport Leo before 9 a.m., you stand in the door. And if they come with police? Hatchet asked. Then you stand in the door politely. Hatchet almost smiled. Polite's not really my... Learn. The clubhouse became a war room. Alina and Wren worked side by side at the table, assembling the evidence package with the focused intensity of people building a bomb out of paperwork. Carol pulled files in silence, her face tight, her jaw set, her career dismantling itself with every click of her county-issued laptop. Coffee was made, cigarettes were smoked, the hours crawled. At midnight, Deacon called. She'll sign. Grave closed his eyes. Just for a moment, just long enough to feel the weight shift. Not lift, not lighten, but shift from impossible to merely desperate, which was an improvement he'd take. What did she say? She cried. She asked why. I told her the truth, a wrong number. She said she didn't understand how strangers could do more for her son than the entire system built to protect him. I didn't have an answer for that. Did you explain the risk? I told her that designating you as guardian was a legal long shot, that the court could challenge it, that Dale would fight it, that the whole thing might buy us nothing but a few hours. She said a few hours was more than anyone had ever given her. Then she signed. Grave's hand pressed flat against the table. The wood was cold and scarred and real. Is the document witnessed? Night shift nurse signed as witness. Shelley's attending physician co-signed for medical competency verification. It's as solid as I could make it at midnight in a hospital with no lawyer present. It'll hold long enough. It better. At 2:15 a.m., Alina finished the evidence package. 212 pages of documentation, case files, financial records, corporate filings, the Solis affidavit, Carol's database extractions, and a 14-page narrative summary tying everything together. She formatted it for the AG's Public Integrity Division and attached a cover letter requesting emergency intervention under the state's Child Welfare Oversight Act. "I have a contact in the AG's office," she said, sliding her laptop closed. "An investigator named Reeves. We worked together on a story 4 years ago. He's solid. He'll read it." "Will he act on it?" "If he reads it, he'll act. The question is whether he reads it in time." She sent the email at 2:23 a.m. The digital timestamp would later become part of the official record. At 4 a.m., the clubhouse fell into a brief, restless quiet. Alina slept on the couch with her jacket over her shoulders. Carol sat in the back office staring at the wall. Ren dozed at the table with his head on his legal pad. The others rotated, some sleeping, some smoking in the parking lot, some just sitting in the dark with the particular wakefulness of men who'd done this before, who'd sat through long nights before operations and understood that the hours before contact were always the worst because they belonged entirely to doubt. Grave didn't sleep. He sat in the main room with a single lamp on and the temporary guardianship document in front of him, a single sheet of paper with Shelley's shaking signature, a nurse's witness signature, and a doctor's notation confirming the signer's competency. One sheet of paper, tissue paper, Alina had called it, tissue paper standing between a child and a machine. He read the document again and again, looking for weaknesses, looking for gaps, looking for the places where a judge who was also a criminal could drive a truck through the language and flatten everything they'd built. At 5:10 a.m., Torch called from the courthouse. "I'm in position. Parking lot's empty. Building opens at 7 for staff. No movement yet. Stay on it. I want to know the minute Dale or Arliss shows up." At 5:45 a.m., Hatchet and Pike arrived at Mercy General. They took positions in the hallway, Hatchet near the elevator, Pike by the stairwell. Deacon briefed them and stayed at his post outside Shelley's room. 3 bikers in a hospital corridor at dawn, leather cuts visible, patches facing out. The morning shift nurses stared. The security guard made a phone call. Nobody asked them to leave. At 6:12 a.m., Graves' phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Maddox, this is David Reeves, State Attorney General's Public Integrity Division." Graves' heart rate didn't change. His hand didn't shake, but his eyes closed for 1 second, and in that second, every hour of the last 3 days compressed into a single point of light behind his eyelids. "Mr. Reeves? I've reviewed the materials submitted by Miss Cross. I've been on the phone with my section chief for the last 30 minutes. I need to ask you some questions, and I need the answers to be precise." "Go ahead." "The custody hearing, Judge Arliss presiding, is scheduled for 9 a.m. today?" "Yes. And you're telling me the presiding judge has a financial interest in the facility where the child would be placed?" "That's what the corporate filings show." "I'm looking at them now. Mountain Laurel Properties, Ridgeline Capital Management, Arliss and Webb. The escrow routing it's not subtle. It's actually remarkably sloppy for a man who's been doing this for 8 years. Arrogance doesn't require subtlety." "No, it doesn't." A pause, papers shuffling. "Mr. Maddox, I'm going to be direct with you. What you've given us is preliminary. It's not enough for a criminal case. But it is enough, more than enough, for an emergency injunction freezing all custody proceedings involving Dale Beckett's caseload pending a full investigation. How fast can you file?" "I've already drafted the petition. I need my section chief's signature and a state circuit judge to sign the order. That's 2 phone calls and 1 signature. The hearing is in less than 3 hours." "I'm aware. I'm making the calls now. But I need you to understand something. Even if I file the injunction this morning, there's a window. A gap between when Arliss opens the hearing and when the injunction reaches his courtroom. If he signs the custody order before the injunction is served, we have a jurisdictional conflict that could take days to resolve. Days during which Dale could execute the placement. Then the injunction needs to arrive before he signs. I'll do everything I can, but I can't control the clock." "I know, that's my job." He hung up, looked at the clock. 6:23 a.m., 2 hours and 37 minutes. Grave called every man, short conversations, operational, the kind of terse, clipped exchanges that happened in the minutes before contact. "Deacon, status." "Leo's awake. He's asking what's happening. I told him the truth, that people are fighting for him. He asked if that meant you. Grave paused. What did you say? I said yes. Keep him in that room. Do not let anyone from the county near him. Copy. Torch. Status. Dale's car just pulled into the courthouse lot. 6:31 a.m. He's carrying a briefcase. He went in through the side entrance. Arliss? Not yet. The minute he shows, call me. At 7:15 a.m., Grave and Bone arrived at the Rockbridge County Courthouse. It was a small building, 2 stories of red brick and white columns that looked like it had been designed to photograph well and function adequately. The morning was cold and gray, the sky low and heavy with the threat of more rain. A few county employees moved through the front entrance with coffee cups and the sleepwalking posture of people who did the same thing every day and had stopped noticing. Graves stood on the sidewalk across the street. Bone stood beside him. They were 2 large men in leather cuts on a public sidewalk in a small Virginia town at 7:15 in the morning, and every person who walked past them looked and then looked away with the particular speed of people encountering something they didn't want to have seen. At 7:44 a.m., Torch called. Arliss just arrived. Black Lincoln. He's going in through the judge's entrance on the east side. Grave checked his phone. No message from Reeves. At 8:05 a.m., his phone buzzed. Reeves. Section Chief signed off. I'm driving the petition to Judge Catherine Hadley in Salem right now. She's agreed to review it. How far is Salem? 40 minutes from my office. I left 10 minutes ago. Grave did the math. Reeves was 30 minutes from Salem. Hadley needed time to read and sign. Then the order needed to be transmitted to the Rockbridge Courthouse. Fax, email, phone call. Whichever way it traveled, it needed a body on the other end to receive it and walk it into the courtroom. You'll have the signed injunction by when? If Hadley doesn't push back, 8:45, maybe 9. That's cutting it to the bone. I know. What if she pushes back? Then we're in trouble. Grave hung up, looked at Bone. Bone's face hadn't changed, it rarely did, but his eyes were fixed on the courthouse with the focused stillness of a man who'd once watched enemy positions through a rifle scope for 17 hours without blinking. We might need to go inside, Grave said. Bone nodded once. At 8:22 a.m., Dale Beckett emerged from the courthouse's side entrance and walked to his car. He opened the trunk, retrieved a second briefcase, a thinner one, different from the first, and went back inside. The second briefcase meant additional documents, additional preparation, a man shoring up his case before the hearing. Graves' phone buzzed. Deacon. We have a problem. 2 county transport officers just arrived at the hospital. They have paperwork authorizing pre-hearing transfer of a minor to protective custody. They're saying the judge signed a pre-hearing order. The ground shifted. Not literally, but Grave felt it. The stomach-dropping lurch of a plan being outflanked by someone who'd been doing this longer and had the machinery to move faster. A pre-hearing transfer. He's not waiting for 9 o'clock. He's taking the kid now, Grave. They've got a signed order. Hospital admin is reviewing it. We've got minutes. Grave was already moving. Show them the guardianship document. I did. They're saying a judge's order supersedes a parental designation. Then show it again, loudly, in front of every nurse, every doctor, and every patient on that floor. Make it a scene. Make it public. Make it impossible for them to take that child without every person in that hospital watching. And if they still take him? Grave stopped on the sidewalk. The courthouse loomed across the street, brick and columns, and the false promise of justice. Inside that building, a man who profited from children's suffering was putting on his robe and preparing to add one more child to his inventory. And across town, 2 transport officers were standing in a hospital hallway preparing to carry out an order signed by a criminal masquerading as a judge. They're not taking him, Grave said. He turned to Bone. Go to the hospital, now. Bone didn't ask questions, didn't nod, didn't blink. He simply turned, walked to his motorcycle, and was gone. The Harley's engine ripping through the morning quiet like a seam tearing open. Grave walked across the street toward the courthouse. He pushed through the front doors at 8:31 a.m. The lobby was small. A metal detector, a board security guard, a directory on the wall listing courtrooms and offices. The guard looked up, looked at the leather cut, looked at the patches. His hand moved toward the radio on his belt. "I'm here for the 9 a.m. hearing," Graves said. "Mercer custody case, courtroom B. Are you a party to the case?" "I'm the child's designated temporary guardian." He held up the document. The guard looked at it, looked at him. The radio hand hesitated. "Courtroom B is upstairs, second door on the left." Grave walked past the metal detector. It didn't go off. He carried no weapons. He didn't need them. The weapon he carried was a single sheet of paper with a mother's signature and the stubborn, unreasonable belief that sometimes the only thing standing between a child and the dark was a man willing to stand there. The courtroom was small and cold and smelled like furniture polish and stale institutional air. 3 rows of wooden benches, a judge's bench on a raised platform, an American flag in the corner. Dale Beckett sat at the petitioner's table with his briefcase open and his hands folded, and when Grave walked through the door, Dale's composure cracked for the first time since this began. Not his face. His hands. They unfolded, refolded, unfolded again. The involuntary fidget of a man whose controlled environment had just admitted an uncontrolled variable. "You can't be here," Dale said. Graves sat down in the front bench. He set the guardianship document on his knee. He looked at Dale with the same expression he'd worn when he'd stepped past Crusher in the motel room. The expression of a man walking past something that didn't matter on his way to something that did. "I'm here. This is a closed hearing. Family court proceedings are not open to. I'm the child's temporary guardian, designated by the mother, witnessed and co-signed. I have standing." Dale's jaw worked. A muscle in his cheek tightened and released. He reached for his phone, typed something, and set it face down on the table. At 8:38 a.m., the side door opened and Judge Warren Arliss entered. He was smaller than Grave expected. 5'8", thin, mid-60s, with silver hair combed back and the delicate hands of a man who'd never done physical labor in his life. His robe was pressed. His shoes were polished. His face wore the practiced benevolence of a man who'd spent decades pretending to weigh justice, while his thumb sat permanently on one side of the scale. Arliss looked at Grave. The benevolence didn't falter. It shifted, recalibrated, incorporated the new presence into a framework the judge had clearly used before. The framework of a man who believed he controlled the room because he controlled the chair. "And you are?" "Ronan Maddox, temporary guardian of Leo Mercer. I wasn't informed of a guardianship designation. It was filed with the hospital last night. The mother is conscious, coherent, and exercised her right to designate a guardian during her incapacitation." Arliss looked at Dale. Dale shook his head. A small, tight movement. The silent communication of men who'd coordinated in this room before. "The petition before me is an emergency custody transfer based on guardian incapacitation and lack of suitable family placement," Arliss said. "If the mother has designated a guardian, I'll need to review the documentation." Graves stood and handed the paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Arliss read it. His expression didn't change, but his eyes moved over the text twice. The second passed slower than the first, the way a man reads something he's looking for weaknesses in. "This is informal," Arliss said. "It's legal. It's a parental designation witnessed by a nurse and co-signed by a physician. It doesn't carry the weight of a court-ordered guardianship. It doesn't need to. Under Virginia Code Section 20-166, a custodial parent has the right to designate a temporary guardian during medical incapacitation. The designation is effective upon signing and remains in force until the parent rescinds or a court finds cause to override." Arliss's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected statute citations from a man in a leather vest. The recalibration was visible, a shifting behind his judicial mask as the judge realized the obstacle in front of him was not as simple as it appeared. "I'll take this under advisement," Arliss said. "But the petition before me raises legitimate concerns about the child's welfare, and I'm inclined to—" "Your Honor!" The voice came from the back of the courtroom. Everyone turned. A woman stood in the doorway, mid-50s, gray suit, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing an expression that suggested she'd driven very fast to get here and was not in the mood to be patient. Behind her, a man in a navy suit held a phone to his ear with one hand and a sealed envelope in the other. "My name is Catherine Hadley. I'm a circuit court judge for the 25th Judicial District. The gentleman behind me is David Reeves, investigator with the Virginia Attorney General's Public Integrity Division. The room went still. Dale's phone buzzed on the table. He didn't reach for it. Mr. Reeves is carrying a signed emergency injunction issued by my court 17 minutes ago, freezing all custody proceedings currently administered by the Rockbridge County Department of Child Protective Services pending a full investigation into financial misconduct, conflict of interest, and violations of the State Child Welfare Oversight Act. She paused, looked at Arliss. That includes this hearing, Judge Arliss. Reeves walked forward and placed the sealed envelope on the bench. Arliss looked at it in the way a man looks at a door that's about to open onto something he can't control. This is highly irregular, Arliss began. What's irregular, Judge Hadley said, is a sitting judge approving custody placements into a facility in which he holds a financial interest. What's irregular is a CPS supervisor bearing domestic violence complaints to protect a family member. What's irregular is 14 children being funneled into a revenue-generating pipeline while the bench that's supposed to protect them collects the profits. Dale stood up. His chair scraped backward. You have no jurisdiction to sham. Sit down, Mr. Beckett. Reeves stepped forward. Mr. Beckett, the Attorney General's office is formally requesting your cooperation in a state investigation. You're not under arrest. You are, however, suspended from all duties effective immediately. Your database access has been revoked as of 30 minutes ago. Dale's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds: shock, calculation, and then something Grave recognized from the motel room. The same expression Crusher had worn when the headlights filled the window. The expression of a predator realizing the cage had closed. Arliss opened the envelope, read the injunction. His hands were steady, the hands of a man who'd practiced composure for decades. But the color drained from his face in a slow tide that started at his collar and moved upward until even his silver hair seemed paler. This hearing is adjourned, he said. 3 words. Spoken to the room. But his eyes were on Grave. And what Grave saw in those eyes was not defeat, not remorse, not the recognition of justice served. What he saw was the cold, assessing fury of a man who had been interrupted, not stopped. A man who had the resources and the connections and the survival instinct to fight back from this. A man who was already, even now, even as the injunction sat on his bench and the investigator stood in his courtroom, calculating his next move. This wasn't over. But Leo was safe. Right now, in this moment, in this small, cold courtroom that smelled like furniture polish and the dying breath of a corrupt man's empire, a 10-year-old boy was safe. Graves' phone buzzed. Deacon. Transport officers leaving. They got the call. Leo's still here. He's asking for you. Graves stood. He looked at Dale, who was gathering his briefcase with hands that trembled slightly at the fingertips. He looked at Arliss, who sat motionless on the bench with the injunction open before him like a mirror showing a face he didn't want to see. Then he walked out of the courtroom, down the stairs, through the lobby, past the security guard who watched him go with wide eyes, and into the cold gray morning where his motorcycle waited at the curb like a promise kept. He rode to the hospital at exactly the speed limit. There was no rush now. Not this minute, not this hour. The machine had been jammed. The gears had stopped, and somewhere in Salem, a circuit court judge and a state investigator were beginning the work that would take months, but would end with handcuffs and headlines and the slow, grinding justice that the system delivered when it was forced to look at its own rot. At Mercy General, Grave walked through the doors and down the corridor and past the nurses' station, where 3 women watched him with expressions that ranged from wariness to something softer. He walked past Hatchet and Pike, who stood at their posts like sentinels carved from leather and scar tissue. He walked past Deacon, who simply nodded. The nod of a man who'd held the line and knew it and didn't need to say it. He walked into Leo's room. The boy was sitting up in bed. The IV was out. The monitor had been disconnected. He was wearing a hospital gown 2 sizes too big, and his feet dangled off the edge of the mattress, bare and small and impossibly fragile against the institutional whiteness of the sheets. Leo looked at him. Grave looked back. And for a moment, just a moment, the space between them held everything that had happened and everything that was coming, all of it suspended in the fluorescent light of a hospital room where a man who'd been 4 minutes too late for his own daughter had just arrived exactly on time for someone else's son. "Is it over?" Leo asked. Graves sat down in the plastic chair. It creaked under his weight the same way it had 3 days ago, the first time he'd sat in it, the first night, when everything was chaos and fear and the smell of antiseptic and nothing was certain. "The hard part is," he said, "what comes next?" Grave looked at the window. Outside, the sky was still gray, but somewhere behind the clouds, the sun was doing what it always did, rising, whether anyone noticed or not. "Next," he said, "we bring you home." The investigation took 11 weeks. 11 weeks of state attorneys in dark suits walking in and out of the Rockbridge County Courthouse carrying boxes of documents. 11 weeks of sealed depositions and forensic accountants and database analysts pulling apart Dale Beckett's 11-year tenure, one falsified case file at a time. 11 weeks during which the machinery of actual justice, slow, grinding, unglamorous, and utterly without mercy, did what it was built to do when someone finally forced it to look in the right direction. Dale Beckett was arrested on a Tuesday morning in January, 43 days after the injunction froze his caseload. The charges filled 2 pages, 14 counts of child welfare fraud, 6 counts of obstruction of justice, 4 counts of official misconduct, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud related to the financial routing through Ridgeline Capital Management. He was arrested at his kitchen table at 6:15 a.m. by 2 state police officers and a federal marshal who'd been attached to the case when the wire fraud charges elevated it to federal jurisdiction. He was eating cereal. The spoon was still in his hand when they cuffed him. Judge Warren Arliss resigned from the bench 9 days before his own arrest warrant was issued. The resignation was framed as retirement, health reasons, the press release said, a desire to spend time with family. But the timing fooled no one, and the warrant came anyway. Arliss was charged with racketeering, judicial corruption, conspiracy, and 12 counts of conflict of interest. The financial trail Wren had mapped in a converted storage closet on a laptop older than some of the club's prospects turned out to be remarkably accurate. Alina's published investigation, which ran as a 4-part series in the Virginia Gazette, after 3 national outlets declined to touch a story sourced partly by a motorcycle club, confirmed every number Wren had calculated and added 6 figures more. The total funds routed through the Route 7 pipeline exceeded $5.1 million over 9 years, $5.1 million measured in children. Garvin Poole was arrested the same week as Arliss. His charges were different: neglect, endangerment, fraud, but the destination was the same. Route 7 group home was shut down by state order on a Thursday afternoon in February. The 11 children still in residence were transferred to vetted facilities under the supervision of a newly appointed CPS director who had no connection to Dale, no connection to Arliss, and no patience for the culture of institutional silence that had allowed the pipeline to operate for nearly a decade. Carol Penn was fired, as she'd predicted. The county terminated her for unauthorized database access, a technically accurate charge that ignored the morally obvious context. She appealed. The appeal was pending. In the meantime, Alina Cross hired her as a research consultant for the ongoing investigation, paying her out of the freelance budget the Gazette had allocated for what was quickly becoming the biggest child welfare corruption story in the state's recent history. Carol worked from a desk in Alina's home office in Harrisonburg, surrounded by the same boxes of files she'd helped create, and she told anyone who asked that getting fired was the best thing that had ever happened to her career because it was the first time her career had actually meant something. Crusher never made it back to Shelley. His bail was revoked 72 hours after the injunction, when the state's expanded investigation surfaced evidence that Dale had been coaching his brother's behavior. Text messages between the 2 men discussing how to manage Shelley, how to isolate her from support systems, how to ensure that her attempts to seek help were intercepted and neutralized. The texts were clinical, strategic. They read less like communication between brothers and more like operational planning between a handler and his asset. Crusher was a weapon Dale maintained, a blunt instrument of domestic terror that kept Shelley compliant and Leo invisible, because invisible children don't generate complaints, and children who don't generate complaints don't attract attention to the man whose job it is to receive those complaints. With the coaching evidence added to the original domestic battery and child endangerment charges, Crusher's case was moved to circuit court. The plea deal offered by the prosecution was 7 years. Crusher's public defender advised him to take it. He took it. He was transferred to a state facility 200 miles south, and the distance between him and room 104 of the Trails End Motel became permanent in a way that no amount of bail money or brotherly intervention could bridge. Shelley Mercer was released from Mercy General on a Saturday morning in late November, 8 days after the motel. She walked out of the hospital under her own power, moving slowly, one hand pressed against her ribs where the fractures were still healing, the other hand holding Leo's. Deacon drove them to a temporary apartment the club had arranged, a clean 2-bedroom unit above a hardware store in Brecker, paid for with money from the Saints' emergency fund, a pool of cash that existed for exactly this kind of situation and had never been used because the situation had never arisen before. The apartment was small but warm. Someone, Graves suspected Torch, had stocked the kitchen with groceries. Someone else had left a stack of blankets on the couch and a box of books on the counter, children's books mixed with paperbacks, the kind of care package assembled by men who didn't know exactly what a woman and child needed but were determined to guess correctly. Shelley stood in the center of the living room and looked around. She touched the curtains. She touched the clean countertop. She opened the refrigerator and stared at the food inside with an expression that Graves, standing in the doorway, recognized. The expression of someone encountering normalcy after so long in survival mode that normalcy itself felt foreign, suspicious, like a trap that hadn't sprung yet. "How long can we stay?" she asked. "As long as you need." "That's not how things work. It's how this works." She turned to look at him. Her left eye was still healing. The orbital fracture had left a discoloration that makeup couldn't fully conceal and that she hadn't tried to conceal. She wore it openly, the way soldiers wear their scars, not with pride, but with the quiet acknowledgement that hiding it would cost more energy than she had. "I don't understand you," she said. "Any of you. You don't know us. You owe us nothing, and you've done more for my son in 10 days than every system that was supposed to protect him did in 3 years. Grave leaned against the doorframe. His leather cut hung open over a flannel shirt that had been washed so many times the plaid was barely visible. He looked tired, the deep structural fatigue of a man who'd been running on purpose instead of sleep and was only now beginning to feel the debt. "Your son sent a message," he said. "I received it. That's the whole story." "No, that's the beginning of the story. The story is that you came. You came, and you stayed, and you fought a judge, and a system, and a county, and you did it for a kid you'd never met. Why?" He looked at her for a long time. Outside, the November wind pushed against the windows, and somewhere down the street a dog barked, and the sounds of a small town doing its small town things filtered through the walls like a reminder that the world existed beyond hospitals and courthouses and motel rooms where bathroom doors got kicked off their hinges. "Because I was supposed to," he said. It wasn't a complete answer. They both knew it. But it was the truest thing he could say without opening the room inside his chest where Sarah's name lived. And Shelley seemed to understand, perhaps because she had her own rooms she kept closed, her own names she carried quietly, that some truths were offered in pieces, and the pieces were enough. The weeks that followed had their own rhythm. Shelley found a job at a diner called Mabel's on the main road through Brecker, a breakfast and lunch place with checkered tablecloths and coffee that had been brewing since before most of its customers were born. The owner, a woman named Patrice, who'd owned the place for 20 years and had opinions about everything and tolerance for nothing, hired Shelley on the spot after a 10-minute conversation that consisted mostly of Patrice asking whether Shelley could carry 4 plates at once, and Shelley demonstrating that she could carry 5. Leo enrolled in Brecker Elementary. It was a small school, 200 students, 1 hallway, a gymnasium that doubled as a cafeteria, and Leo approached it with the cautious surveillance of a child entering unfamiliar territory. He mapped the exits on his first day. He identified the adults who seemed safe and the ones who didn't. He sat in the back of every classroom and spoke only when spoken to, and his teachers noted in their first-week reports that he was bright, polite, withdrawn, and startled easily at loud noises. But he came home every afternoon to an apartment that was warm and quiet and had food in the refrigerator, and that was new. And twice a week after school, he walked 4 blocks to the Iron Saints garage and sat on an overturned milk crate while Grave worked on motorcycles. They didn't talk much during those sessions. Grave was not a man who filled silence with words, and Leo had learned long ago that silence could be either a weapon or a sanctuary, depending on who was sharing it. With Grave, the silence was the second kind. It was the silence of a garage in the late afternoon, filled with the smell of motor oil and WD-40 and the metallic taste of cold air coming through the open bay door. It was the sound of a ratchet clicking, a chain being adjusted, an engine part being cleaned with a rag that had been used so many times it was more memory than fabric. Sometimes Grave explained what he was doing, not in the instructional way of a teacher, but in the offhand way of a man thinking out loud. This is the timing chain. If it slips, the engine eats itself. Or, you torque the bolts in a star pattern, everything balances. Nothing gets more pressure than it can handle. Small lessons that were about motorcycles and also about everything else, delivered without emphasis, absorbed without acknowledgement, and stored somewhere in Leo's mind alongside the other things he was slowly, cautiously learning about what it meant to be around men who fixed things instead of breaking them. One afternoon in December, Leo asked a question. "Did you have a kid?" Grave's hand stopped moving on the engine. For 3 seconds, the garage was completely still. No ratchet, no wind, no sound except the distant hum of traffic on the main road. Then his hands resumed. The ratchet clicked. "A daughter," he said. "Sarah? Where is she?" "She died. A long time ago." Leo was quiet. He sat on the milk crate with his knees pulled up and his sneakers flat against the concrete floor, and he processed this information the way he processed everything. Silently, completely, with the full weight of a child who understood loss in ways that adults tried to protect children from understanding. "Is that why you came?" he asked. "When I texted?" Graves set the ratchet down. He wiped his hands on the rag. He sat on the edge of the workbench and looked at the boy. Really looked. Past the surface, past the small frame and the cautious eyes and the habit of sitting near exits, and into the part of Leo that was neither broken nor whole, but somewhere in between, the part that was still deciding what kind of person the world would allow him to become. "Yeah," he said. "That's why I came." "Do you wish it had been her?" The question hit like a quiet thunderclap. Not cruel. Leo didn't have cruelty in him, just honest. With the surgical honesty of a child who hadn't yet learned that some questions were supposed to remain unasked. Grave breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the same way he'd taught Leo to breathe in a motel bathtub a lifetime ago. "Every day," he said, "and I don't regret being there for you. Both of those things are true at the same time. You're old enough to understand that." Leo nodded. He didn't say anything else. He picked up a socket wrench from the tray beside him and held it out toward Grave. Not a gesture of comfort, not a hug, not the kind of emotional display that adults expected from children in moments of vulnerability. Just a tool, offered by a boy to a man, so the work could continue. Grave took the wrench. Their fingers touched briefly in the exchange. The boy's small and cold from the December air. The man's large and scarred and warm from the engine. And the contact lasted less than a second, but carried the weight of something that neither of them would have been able to name, and neither of them needed to. The work continued. Harold Mercer, Pop, arrived in Brecker 2 weeks before the new year. He was 82, thin, slightly stooped, and he drove a 1994 Ford pickup that sounded like it was negotiating the terms of its own survival with every mile. He pulled into the parking lot of the hardware store, looked up at the apartment windows, and sat in his truck for a long time with both hands on the steering wheel and his eyes closed. When he finally came upstairs, Leo was waiting at the door. The old man knelt, slowly, painfully, with the careful negotiation of joints that no longer cooperated without complaint, and wrapped his arms around his grandson. Leo pressed his face into the collar of Harold's jacket, which smelled like pipe tobacco and engine grease and the particular warmth of a person who had been a fixed point in a world that moved too fast and hit too hard. They stayed like that for a while. Shelley watched from the kitchen doorway with her hand over her mouth and her eyes full. Nobody spoke. The moment didn't require words. It required only presence. The physical, irreducible fact of people who belonged to each other occupying the same space after too long apart. Harold met Grave that evening at the garage. The old man walked in slowly, looked around at the motorcycles and the tools and the photographs on the wall, and then looked at Grave with an expression that was difficult to read. Not hostile, not grateful, not anything so simple as a single emotion. It was the expression of a man who had spent 40 years raising a daughter and then a grandson and had watched, helpless, as the systems meant to protect them had failed over and over, and who was now standing in front of a stranger who had done what he couldn't. "You're the one who got the text," Harold said. "Yes, sir. My number's 540-887-6823. He hit a 6 instead of an 8. "Yes, sir." Harold nodded. He looked at the Harley on the lift, Graves' bike, the black one, the one he'd ridden through a rainstorm at 90 miles an hour to reach a motel where a boy was dying. The old man reached out and touched the handlebar. His fingers were gnarled and spotted, and they trembled slightly, and the touch was gentle, the way you touch something that carried someone you love through danger. "I should have been closer," Harold said. "I should have moved closer when Shelley started with that man. I knew what he was. I told her. She didn't listen, and I let the distance be my excuse." "The distance wasn't your fault." "Distance is always a choice. I chose wrong." "Then choose different now." Harold looked at him. The two men stood in the garage under the shop light, one old and one scarred, one in a flannel jacket and one in leather, one carrying the guilt of distance and the other carrying the guilt of 4 minutes. And the understanding that passed between them required no handshake, no oath, no formal agreement. It was the understanding of men who had failed to protect someone they loved and had been given, by the irrational mercy of a misdialed number, the chance to try again. "I'm moving to Brecker," Harold said. "Found a place on Elm Street, 2 bedrooms. Close enough to walk to the school. Shelley knows? We talked about it yesterday. She's not the same, but she's stronger than she thinks. She always was." Grave nodded. "She is." Harold turned toward the door, stopped, turned back. "My grandson tells me you lost a daughter." The garage was quiet. The shop light hummed. "He also tells me you taught him how to breathe." Grave said nothing. "I don't know what to say to a man who did what you did. Thank you isn't big enough. I'm sorry isn't right. So I'll just say this, whatever you lost, whatever you carry, the thing you did for Leo means it wasn't for nothing. I don't know if that helps, but it's true." Harold walked out into the cold evening. His truck started on the 3rd try. The headlights swept across the parking lot, and then he was gone. And Graves stood alone in the garage with the smell of motor oil and the ghost of a touch on a handlebar and the old man's words sitting in his chest like something warm in a cold room. Spring came the way it always comes to the Virginia foothills. Reluctantly, in fits and starts, with cold mornings that softened into mild afternoons and evenings that smelled like wet earth and the first tentative green of things remembering how to grow. Leo turned 11 in March. The party was held at the Iron Saints garage. Torch's idea, executed with the logistical precision of a man who'd coordinated military supply chains and applied the same rigor to birthday balloons. There was a cake from Mabel's diner, chocolate, slightly lopsided, with 11 candles that Leo blew out in one breath because his lungs worked now, because the asthma was managed, because he had an inhaler that was always where he could reach it, and a life that no longer required him to breathe through a straw. The Saints were there, all 7. Standing around the garage in their leather cuts with paper plates of cake in their scarred hands, looking exactly like what they were. Dangerous men in an oil-stained garage eating chocolate cake at a child's birthday party, and not one of them out of place. Shelley was there, laughing at something Patrice said. Her face healed, the orbital discoloration faded to a faint shadow that was visible only in certain light. Harold was there, sitting in a folding chair with a cup of coffee, watching his grandson with the quiet, fierce attention of a man who understood that watching was its own form of protection. Alina Cross was there. She'd driven from Harrisonburg with a card and a book about motorcycles she'd found at a used bookstore. Carol Penn was there, wearing a new jacket, and an expression that looked, for the first time since Grave had met her, like something other than fear. Deacon stood by the bay door, leaning against the frame, watching the room with the particular stillness of a man who spent most of his life fixing damage and was now watching, for once, the absence of it. He caught Graves' eye across the garage, nodded, a small nod. The nod of a man acknowledging that the thing they'd done, the insane, reckless, legally questionable thing they'd done, had worked. Not perfectly, not without cost, but it had worked. After the cake, after the plates were cleared, and the balloons drifted against the ceiling, and the conversations dissolved into the comfortable noise of people who didn't need a reason to be in the same room, Graves stepped outside. The evening was cool. The sun was low over the foothills, turning the sky shades of copper and ash. His Harley sat in the parking lot, cleaned and polished. Leo had helped wash it last week, carefully, methodically, treating the chrome with a reverence that made Graves' chest tight in a way he couldn't explain. He lit a cigarette, leaned against the wall, breathed. The door opened behind him. Leo came out, still carrying a paper plate with a half-eaten piece of cake. He stood beside Grave and looked at the sunset with the quiet seriousness of a boy who was learning, day by day, that the world contained beauty as well as violence, and that the distance between the two was sometimes no wider than a phone call. Grave? Yeah. Thank you. It was the first time Leo had said it. Not because he hadn't felt it. Grave knew the boy felt it, had felt it since the motel, since the bathtub, since the moment a stranger's voice had come through a cracked phone and said, "I'm coming to get you." But Leo was a boy who measured words the way Grave measured them, carefully, sparingly, and only when the silence couldn't carry the weight anymore. "You don't have to thank me, Leo." "I know. That's why I'm doing it." Grave looked down at him. The boy had grown in the last 4 months. Not much, not visibly, but in the way he stood, the way he held his shoulders, the way his eyes moved across a room. He still mapped exits. He still startled at loud sounds. He still carried the architecture of fear inside a body that was slowly, imperfectly, learning to inhabit spaces without calculating escape routes. But he was standing outside a garage on a spring evening eating birthday cake beside a man who wore a leather cut and smelled like motor oil, and he was not afraid. And that, the absence of fear, the presence of something quieter and more durable in its place, was perhaps the only measure of progress that mattered. Grave reached into the inside pocket of his cut and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. He'd been carrying it for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment, and the right moment had turned out to be this one. Not the party, not the cake, not the crowd, but the quiet after. When the sun was going down, and the world was still, and 2 people could stand together without performance. "Open it," he said. Leo set down his plate, unwrapped the paper carefully, the way he did everything, with attention, with caution, with the automatic preservation instinct of a child who'd learned that carelessness had consequences. Inside was a leather vest, small, black, worn soft at the edges, cut down and restitched from an old piece of club leather that Grave had taken apart and rebuilt by hand over the course of a week, using skills he'd learned from a leather worker in Kandahar 20 years ago. On the back, the Iron Saints patch, the same design the members wore, scaled down, precise. And over the left chest, above the heart, a small rectangular patch hand-stitched in white thread on black. Little brother. Leo held it. His fingers moved over the leather, over the stitching, over the patch. His throat worked, a visible, physical effort to manage something that was rising inside him like a tide, something too large for the container of a small body on a spring evening. He didn't cry. He almost did. His eyes filled and his chin trembled once, and then he straightened and put the vest on over his t-shirt with the deliberate seriousness of a boy accepting something he understood was both a gift and a responsibility. It was too big. The shoulders hung past his arms. The hem dropped below his waist. He looked like a child wearing his father's jacket, swimming in it, lost in it, and somehow, impossibly, exactly where he belonged. "It fits," Leo said. Grave almost smiled. Not quite. The scar on his jaw made full smiles rare and partial smiles rarer, but the corners of his mouth shifted. A tectonic movement, small and seismic, and his eyes softened in a way that the men who knew him would have recognized as the closest thing Grave Maddox had to joy. "Yeah," he said. "It does." The door opened again. Deacon leaned out. Looked at the vest, looked at Grave, looked at the boy standing in leather that hung past his hands, wearing a patch over his heart, staring up at a scarred man with an expression that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the thing that comes after fear, the thing that doesn't have a name because the people who feel it are too busy living it to stop and label it. Deacon went back inside without saying a word. Through the open door, the sounds of the garage filtered out. Laughter, conversation, the clink of coffee mugs, the low thrum of an old rock song playing from the shop speakers. The sounds of people being together. The sounds of a family that hadn't been born but built, assembled from wrong numbers and broken men, and a child's desperate message launched into the dark. Leo sat on the parking lot curb in his oversized vest and finished his cake. Graves stood beside him, smoking, watching the last light die over the Virginia foothills. Behind them, the motorcycles waited in a row, chrome and steel and the memory of every mile they'd carried their riders through, toward a motel, through a storm, into the unknown, and out the other side. The cigarette burned down. Grave dropped it, crushed it under his boot. The sun disappeared behind the mountains, and the sky turned from copper to violet to the deep, honest black of a rural night, unpolluted by city light. Stars appeared. One at first, then dozens, then a sky full of them, cold and indifferent and beautiful. Grave? Yeah. Can I ride with you sometime? On the motorcycle? Grave looked at the Harley, then at the boy, then at the sky. When you're older. How much older? Old enough that your mother doesn't kill me. Leo grinned. It was the grin of a child who had a future to grow into, which was itself a kind of miracle. Not the supernatural kind, but the human kind. The kind that happens when one person answers a call they didn't have to answer and keeps showing up long after the obligation ends. Inside the garage, someone turned up the music. The bass line thumped through the walls and into the parking lot, and for a moment the curb where they sat vibrated faintly. A pulse, a heartbeat, the rhythm of something alive and imperfect and stubbornly, unreasonably good. And somewhere deep inside the broken machinery of Grave Maddox's chest, in the room where Sarah's name lived, in the space that had been silent for 7 years, something shifted. Not healed, not fixed, not made whole, but shifted. The way a bone shifts as it knits, the way a scar shifts as it softens, the way a man shifts when he stops carrying his grief like a punishment and begins carrying it like a lantern, not because the darkness is gone, but because someone small and brave is walking beside him and needs to see the road. The music played. The stars burned. The motorcycles waited. And the silence, at last, stopped hurting.